subscribe. Click on the bell. Like, comment.
Chapter 23 of Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 23. Noble Hands Made Nobler. After the Marchioness de Fleury had departed, leaving her astonished guest in the drawing-room, Monsieur de Bois was the first one to break the silence. "And you, Mademoiselle Bertha, are you also horrified at this revelation?" he asked. "I?" asked Bertha, making an effort to collect herself. "No, I can never be horrified at any act of Madelaine's, for she could never be guilty of any action that was unworthy. I am only so much astonished that I feel stunned and confused, just as Maurice does. See how bewildered he looks." The countess had now recovered her voice, and said, in a tone trembling with indignation, "It is infamous!" "A degradation we could never have anticipated," rejoined Count Tristan. "She has disgraced her family, disgraced our proud name forever," responded the countess. "Do not say that, aunt," pleaded Bertha. "She has not even used your name, though it is as rightfully hers as yours. Do you not observe that she has only allowed herself to be called by her middle name, and that everyone speaks of her only as Mademoiselle Melanie?" Bertha, as she spoke, bent caressingly over her aunt, and took her hand, but the attempt to soften the infuriated aristocrat was futile. The countess replied with increasing wrath, "I tell you she has humiliated herself and brought us to the last degree. She has brought shame upon our heads." Gaston de Bois was walking up and down the room, thrusting his fingers through his hair, flinging out his arms spasmodically, and now and then giving vent to a muted ejaculation which sounded alarmingly emphatic. When he heard these words, he could restrain himself no longer. He came boldly forward and planted himself directly in front of the countess, unawed by her forbidding manner, exclaiming, "No, madame, that I deny. Mademoiselle de Gramont has brought no shame upon her family." "She no longer belongs to my family," retorted the countess. "I disown her henceforth and forever." "And you do rightly, my mother," added the count. "We will never acknowledge her, never see her again. Maurice and Bertha, we expect that you will abide by our determination." Maurice did not reply. He stood leaning against the mantelpiece, lost in thought, his eyes bent down, his head resting upon his hands. Bertha, however, answered with spirit, "I make no promise of the kind. Nothing could induce me to cast off my dear Madelaine." Monsieur de Bois seized her hand, and, involuntarily carrying it to his lips, said, with mingled enthusiasm and veneration, "You are as noble as I thought you were. I knew you would not forsake her." Bertha raised her eyes to his face with an expression which thrilled him, and she answered, "You will defend her, Monsieur de Bois, you, who can perhaps disperse the cloud of mystery by which her life has been enveloped for the last 4 years. You will tell my aunt how Madelaine has lived, what she has done. You will tell us all about her." "That I will gladly," replied he. "That is, if I can. I never in my life so much desired the power of speech." He broke off, and, in an undertone, gave vent to certain exclamation which indistinctly reached the ears of the countess and Bertha. Their amazed looks did not escape his notice, and he continued, "Ladies, I ought to ask your pardon. Possibly my expressions have sounded to you somewhat profane. I am under the sad necessity of using very strong language. I cannot loosen my tongue, except by the aid of these forcible expletives. I must speak, for I, who have known all Mademoiselle Madelaine's noble impulses, can best explain to you her conduct. The last word, which was the only one which he stammered, was followed by another emphatic ejaculation. Bertha, without heeding this interruption, asked, "And have you known where Madelaine was concealed all this time?" "Yes, mademoiselle, I knew." "And it was you who assisted her to leave Brittany?" "It was I. That was about the first good action which brightened my life, and... Another muttered oath to assist his articulation. "I hope it was only a commencement." Tell us everything quickly," prayed Bertha. "Mademoiselle Madelaine, when she determined to leave the Chateau de Gramont, when she resolved to cease to be dependent, when, in spite of her noble birth, which was her only encumbrance, she proposed to gain a livelihood by honest industry, confided her project to me, and what good she did me in making me feel that I was worthy enough of her esteem to be trusted. She first committed to my charge her family diamonds, her sole possession, and ordered me to dispose of them." "Her diamonds, those which have been in her family for generations? What sacrilege!" cried the countess in accents of horror. "Pardon me, madame. It would have been sacrilege, she thought, and so did I, if she had kept them when their sale could have prevented her being the unhappy recipient of the unwilling charity of her relatives." Go on," urged Bertha. "How did she leave the chateau? How could she travel?" "I obtained her a passport, for it would have been running too great a risk if she had attempted to travel without one. The passport had to be signed by 2 witnesses. Fortunately, 2 of my friends at Rennes were about to leave the country. I selected them as witnesses because they could not be questioned. I told them the whole story and bound them to secrecy. We took out the passport for England to divert pursuit, but Mademoiselle Madelaine only went to Paris, and it was not necessary that her passport should be visaed if she remained there." "But the diamonds, they were those Madame de Fleury wore and which I recognized," exclaimed Bertha. "I made a false step there, but it was just like me to bungle," continued Gaston. "I know that the Jew, Henri Quay, often had transactions with the Marquis de Fleury. I took the diamonds to another Jew from whom I concealed my name, and suggested his taking them to Henri Quay, hinting that the Marquis would probably become their purchaser. The Marquis is a connoisseur of jewels, and, as you are aware, at once secured them. The sum realized was sufficient to supply the simple wants of Mademoiselle Madelaine for years. But this did not satisfy her. Her plan was to work. When she heard that the diamonds were in Monsieur Le Fleury's possession, she embroidered a robe upon which the lilies and shamrock were closely imitated, and took her work to Vignon, Madame de Fleury's dressmaker. Vignon was amazed at the great skill and taste displayed in the design and execution, and offered to give the embroiderer as much employment as she desired. Madame de Fleury being the most influential of Vignon's patrons, the dress was exhibited to her. She was at once struck and charmed by the coincidence that allowed her to become the possessor of a dress upon which the exact design of her new jewels had been imitated. She asked 1,000 questions of Vignon, who gladly monopolized all the credit of inventing this novel pattern. From that moment, Mademoiselle Madelaine's very fingers commenced their marvels upon the celebrated couturier's direction, and Vignon daily congratulated herself upon the mysterious treasure she had discovered. Mademoiselle Madelaine now determined to remain in Paris incognita. She worked night and day, scarcely allowing herself needful rest. But alas, she worked with ceaseless heartache, a heartache upon your account, Maurice, for she knew how wildly you were searching for her, and when you fell ill— Maurice interrupted him. It was she who watched beside me at night. I knew it. I have always been convinced of it. Was I not right? I was bound not to tell you, but there can be no need of concealment now. Yes, when the Sieur de Bonsecours, we had engaged to take care of you during the day, left, and would have been replaced, according to the usual custom, by another to watch through the night, we told her no watcher was needed before morning. Mademoiselle Melanie made herself a garb resembling that worn by the sisterhood, and every night, when the good sister we hired left, Mademoiselle Madelaine took her place. We thought your delirium would prevent your recognizing her. Probably it did at first, returned Maurice, but for many nights before I spoke to you, I was conscious, I was sure of her presence. When you did speak, I was startled enough, resumed Gaston, and it was a sad revelation to Mademoiselle Madelaine, for, when your reason was restored, she could not venture any more to come near you. Did she go to Dresden? How came my birthday handkerchief to be sent from Dresden? Asked Bertha. That was another piece of stupidity of mine. You see what a blockhead I have been. Mademoiselle Madelaine wished to send some token of assurance that she thought of you still, but it was necessary that you would not know she was in Paris. I had the package conveyed to a friend of mine in Dresden, and desired him to remove the envelope and send the parcel to Bordeaux. Though you were in Paris at the time, it would not have been prudent to let you suspect Mademoiselle Madelaine was aware of your sojourn in the metropolis, but when the postmark induced Maurice to start to Dresden, I saw what a fool I had been. It was just like me to commit some absurdity. I always do. I could not dissuade Maurice from going to Dresden, but Mademoiselle Madelaine wrote a note which I enclosed to my friend, and desired to have it left at the hotel where Maurice was staying. After that I was more careful not to commit blunders. The other birthday tokens you received, Mademoiselle Bertha, I always contrived to send you by private hand. Thus there was no postmark to awaken suspicion. But how came Madelaine here to America? Inquired Bertha. When the Marquis de Fleury was appointed ambassador to the United States, Mademoiselle Madelaine learned that Madame de Fleury sorely lamented her hard fate, and mourned over the probability that she would be obliged to have all her dresses sent from Paris. This would be a great inconvenience, for she often liked to have a costume improvised upon the spur of the moment, and completed with fabulous rapidity. Mademoiselle Madelaine had frequently thought of America, and felt that the new country would present a field where she could work more advantageously than in Paris. She desired Vignon to suggest to Madame de Fleury that one of the assistants in her favourite couturier's establishment, the one with whose designs Madame de Fleury was already acquainted, might be tempted, by the certainty of the Marchioness's patronage, to visit America. Madame de Fleury was contented, and immediately proposed that Mademoiselle Melanie should sail in the same steamer. Vignon allowed 2 of her workwomen to accompany her. The sum Mademoiselle Madelaine had realized from her diamonds enabled her to hire a modest house in Washington, and to furnish it tastefully. On her arrival, she sent for Mr. Hilson. Perhaps you remember him, Mademoiselle Bertha. He once dined at the Château de Gramont. Here the Count uttered an exclamation of violent displeasure, but Monsieur de Bois went on. He had requested Mademoiselle Madelaine, if she ever visited America, to let him know. He called upon her once, and she frankly told him the story of her trials, and the conclusion to which they had forced her. He highly approved of her energy, her zeal, and spirit. She made him promise to keep her rank and name a secret. He brought his wife and daughter to see her, and they became her staunch, admiring, and helpful friends. Through them alone she would quickly have been drawn into notice, but a more powerful medium to popularity was at work. The sensation produced by Madame de Fleury's toilettes caused all Washington to flock to the exhibition rooms of Mademoiselle Melanie, who was known to be her couturier. Soon it became a favor for Mademoiselle Melanie to receive new customers. She was forced to move to the elegant mansion where she now resides. It is one of the grandest houses in Washington, and Mademoiselle Melanie has only one more payment to make before it becomes her own. The fact is, people have gone crazy about her. Those who seek her merely upon business, when they come into her presence, are impressed with the conviction that she is not merely their equal, but their superior, and they treat her with involuntary deference. She is rapidly becoming rich, and she has the glory of knowing it is through the labor of her own dainty hands, her own very fingers. "Oh, all she has done was truly noble," said Bertha with enthusiasm. "It was disgraceful," cried the countess fiercely. "She might better have starved. She has torn down her glorious escutcheon to replace it by a mantua-maker's sign. She has stooped to make dresses, to receive customers. Abominable!" Monsieur de Bois, for a moment forgetting the courtesy due to the rank and years of the countess, replied indignantly, "Madame, did she not make your dresses for 3 years? Have you not been one of her customers? An unprofitable customer? The profit was only the difference between what she did at the Château de Gramont and what she does in the city of Washington." "Sir!" exclaimed the countess, giving him a look of rebuke which was intended to silence these unpalatable truths. "You are right, Monsieur de Bois," answered Bertha, not noticing the furious glance of her aunt. "That was a random shaft of yours, but it hits the mark, and strikes me as well as my aunt. Yet I thank you for it. I thank you for defending Madelaine. I thank you for befriending her. I shall never forget it. Never." Bertha frankly stretched out her hand to him. He took it with joyful emotion. "Whom would she have to defend her if I did not? Since her family discard her, since even an able young lawyer utters not a word to plead her cause," he added, looking reproachfully at Maurice. "But she shall never lack a defender while I live, for I love her as a sister. I venerate her as a saint. To me she is the type of all that is best and noblest in the world, the type of that which is greater, more valuable than glory, more useful than fame, more noble than the blood of the countess and duchess, honest labor." Bertha's responsive look spoke her approval. "And what do I not owe her myself?" continued Monsieur de Bois. "It was her words long before her sorrows began, which rendered me conscious of the inert purposelessness of my own existence. It was the effect produced upon me by those words which made me resolve to throw off my sluggish, indolent melancholy and inactivity, and rise up to be one of the world's doers, not breathers only. The change I feel in myself came through her. Even the very power of speaking to you thus freely comes through her, for she encouraged me to conquer my diffidence. She made me despise my weak self-consciousness, and I cannot offer her a sufficient return, no, not if I took up arms against the whole world, her own family included, in her defense. In my presence no one shall ever asperse her nobility of word, deed, or act." Bertha's speaking eyes thanked him and encouraged him again. In spite of the manifest rage of the countess, he went on. But Mademoiselle Madelaine now holds a position which needs no champion. She has made that position herself by her own energy and industry, and the unimpeachable purity of her conduct. In this land where labor is a virtue, and the most laborious, when they combine intellect with industry, become the greatest. In this land it will be no blot upon her noble name, when she chooses to resume it, that she has linked that name with work. She will rather be held up as an example to the daughters of this young country. No one, except Mr. Hilson, not even her zealous patron and devoted admirer, Madame de Fleury, yet knows her history, but everyone feels that she merits reverence, and everyone yields her spontaneous veneration. The young women who she employs idolize her, and she treats them as kindest and most considerate of sisters might. Some among them belong to excellent families, reduced by circumstances, and she has inspired them with courage to work, even with so humble an instrument as the needle, rather than to accept dependence as inevitable. She is fitting them to follow in her footsteps. If her relatives scorn her for the course she has pursued, she will be fully compensated for their scorn by the world's approval. All eyes had been riveted upon Gaston as he spoke, and no one perceived that Madelaine was standing in the room a few paces from the door. Bertha's exclamation first made the others conscious of her presence. "Madelaine, we know all. Oh, what you may have suffered! Oh, how noble you have been! Madelaine, you are dearer to me than ever, far dearer." The tears that ran softly down Madelaine's cheek were her only answer. Bertha, as she wiped them away, said, "These are not like the tears you shed that sorrowful day in the chalet, that day when you must have first made up your mind to leave us. Do you remember how you wept them? Those were tears of agony. You have never wept such tears since, have you, Madelaine?" "No, never. I could not then comprehend what moved you so terribly, but at this moment I understand all your sensations. Now that we have met again, there must be no more tears. You know that I am of age now. I am mistress of my own fortune, and you and I must part no more. You must come and share what is mine. You must have done with work, Madelaine." "That cannot be, my good, generous Bertha. My day of work has not yet closed." "Bertha!" exclaimed the countess, who until then had stood trembling with anger and unable to command her voice. "Bertha, have you quite forgotten yourself? Remember that you are under my guardianship, and I forbid your having association with Mademoiselle de Gramont." Madelaine advanced with calm dignity towards the countess, and said quietly, "Madame, aunt." The countess interrupted her imperiously. "Aunt, how dare you to address me by that title? You, a dressmaker! When you forgot your noble birth, and lowered yourself to the working classes, making yourself one with them, when you demeaned yourself to gain your bread by your needle, bread which should have choked a de Gramont to eat, you should have forgotten your relationship to me, never to remember it again." "If I did not forget it, madame," answered Madelaine, with calm self-respect, "I was at least careful that my condition should not become known to you. I strove to act as though I had been dead to you, that my existence might not cause you mortification. I could not guard against the accident which has thrown us together once more, but for the last time, as far as my will is concerned." "This meeting was not Mademoiselle Madelaine's fault," cried Monsieur de Bois, coming to the rescue. "It was my folly, another blunder of mine. I was dolt enough to think that you had only to see her for all to be well, and, instead of warning Mademoiselle Madelaine that you were in Washington, I kept from her a knowledge which would have prevented your encountering each other. It was all my imprudence, my miscalculation. I see my error, since it has subjected her to insult, and yet what I did," he continued more passionately, regarding Maurice as he spoke, "was for the sake of one who," Madelaine, seized with a sudden dread of a manner in which he might conclude this sentence, broke in abruptly. "Were I not indebted to you, Monsieur de Bois, for so many kindnesses, I might reproach you now, but it is well for me to learn this lesson. It was well for me to be certain that my aunt would discard me because I preferred honest industry to cold charity." "Discard you?" rejoined the countess furiously. "Could you doubt that I would discard you? Henceforth the tie of blood between us is dissolved. You are no relative of mine. I forbid you to make known that we have ever met. I forbid my family to hold any intercourse with you. I appeal to my son to say if this is not the just retribution which your conduct has brought upon you." The count answered with deliberation, as though he were pondering some possibility in his wily mind, as if some idea had occurred to him which prevented his fully sharing in his mother's wrath, or, rather, which tempered the expression of his displeasure. "Madelaine's situation has rendered this most proper and natural course open to us. She could not expect to be formally recognized. She could not suppose it possible, however much consideration we might entertain for her personally, that the Countess de Gramont and her family should allow it to be known that one of their kin is a dressmaker. Madelaine is too reasonable not to see the impropriety, to use a mild word, there would even be in such a suggestion." "I see it very plainly," answered Madelaine, not unmoved by the count's manner, which was so much gentler than his mother's, and not suspecting the moment which induced him to assume this conciliatory tone. The count resumed. "We wish Madelaine well, in spite of her present degraded position. If circumstances should prolong our stay in Washington or America, and it is very possible they may do so, we will only request her to remove to California or Australia, or some distant region where she may live in desirable obscurity, and not run the risk of being brought even into accidental contact with us." "No, no!" exclaimed Bertha vehemently. "We shall not lose her again. We must not. You may all discard her, but I will not. I will always acknowledge her, and I must see her. She is dearer to me than ever. I will not be separated from her." Did Bertha see the look of admiration with which Monsieur du Bois contemplated her as she uttered these words? The countess asked in an imperious tone, "Bertha, have you wholly forgotten yourself? I will never admit this intercourse. I forbid it. If you are willing to brave my displeasure, I presume Madelaine, ungrateful as she has proved herself to be for the protection I granted her during 3 years, will not so wholly forget her debt as to disregard my command." How often Madelaine had been reminded of that debt which her services at the Château de Gramont had cancelled 100 times over. Before she could respond to her aunt's remark, Bertha went on. "You do not comprehend my plan, aunt. Madelaine, of course, must give up her present occupation. There is no need of her pursuing it. I am rich enough for both. She will live with me and share my fortune. Madelaine, will you not refuse me this? For nearly 5 years I have mourned over our separation and wasted my life in the vain hope of seeing you again. You would be ashamed of me if you knew in what weak, frivolous, idle manner I have passed my days, while you were working so unceasingly and with such grand results. I shall never learn to make good use of my hours except under your guidance. Long before I reached my majority, I look forward gladly to the time when I should be a free agent and share my fortune with you. My aunt knows that I communicated my intention to her before you left the Chateau de Gramont. And now, Madelaine, my own best Madelaine, you will let the dream of my life become a reality, will you not? Say yes, I implore you." Bertha had spoken with such genuine warmth and hearty earnestness that a colder nature than Madelaine's must have melted. She folded the generous girl tenderly and silently in her arms, and, after a pause, which the countenance of her aunt made her aware that the proud lady was on the eve of breaking, answered sadly, "It was worth suffering all I endured, Bertha, to have your friendship tested through this fiery ordeal, and to know that your heart cannot be divided by circumstances from mine. But your too liberal offer I cannot accept. The path I have marked out I must pursue until I reach the goal which I am nearing. An incompleteness in the execution of my deliberate plans would render me more miserable than I am to-day in being cast off by my own family." "Do not speak such cruel words," returned Bertha. "They do not cast you off, that is, I do not, and never will, and I am sure—" She turned to look at Maurice, who had stood silent through the whole scene, leaning upon the mantelpiece, his head still resting on his hand, his eyes fixed upon Madelaine, his mind too full of conflicting emotions for him to speak. Above all other images rose that of being whom Madelaine had declared she loved. Did she love him still? Was he here? Did he know her condition? Was Monsieur de Bois, whom she had entrusted with her secret, Monsieur de Bois, who had protected and aided her, the object of her preference? Maurice could not answer these torturing questions, and the happiness of once more beholding the one whom he had so fruitlessly sought made him feel as though he were passing through a strange, wild dream, which, but for one doubt, would have been full of ecstasy. When Bertha appealed to him by her look, he could no longer remain silent. "You are right, Bertha. Madelaine is to me all that she ever was. I am as proud of her as I have ever been. More proud I could not be. To renounce her would be as impossible as it had ever been." Madelaine, who had appeared so firm and composed up to that moment, trembled violently. Her heart seemed to cease in its pulsation. A cold tremor ran through her veins. A mist floated before her eyes. Exquisite happiness became exquisite pain. She turned as though about to leave the room, but her feet faltered. In a second Monsieur de Bois was at her side and gave her his arm. She took it almost unconsciously. The voice of her aunt restored her as suddenly as a dash of ice water could have done. "Your father's commands and mine, then, Maurice, are to have no weight. We order you to renounce all intercourse with this person, whom we no longer acknowledge as a relative, and you unhesitatingly declare to her, in our very presence, that you disregard our wishes. This, it seems, is the first effect of Mademoiselle de Gramont's renewed influence, which we have before now found so pernicious." "Do not fear, madame," answered Madelaine. "I will not permit—" "Make no rash promise, Madelaine," interrupted Maurice. "My father's wishes and my grandmother's must ever have weight with me, but when I honestly differ from them in opinion, I trust there is no disrespect in my saying so. Blindly to obey their commands would be to abnegate free agency and self-responsibility." "I have not forgotten," said the countess freezingly, "that the first disrespect towards me of which you were guilty was originated by Mademoiselle de Gramont. I perceive that she is again about to create a family feud and separate father and son, grandmother and grandchild. All her noble sentiments and heroic acting have ever this end in view. During the period that she concealed herself from us, she has evidently never lost sight of this great aim of her existence, and has closely calculated events and bided her time that she might maneuver with additional power and certainty. She has not disgraced us enough. She is planning the total downfall of our noble house, no matter whom it buries in the ruins. It is not sufficient that we have to blush for the dressmaker who would exchange the device graven upon her ancestral arms for that of scissors and thimble, but she is laboring to bring her disgrace nearer and fasten it more permanently upon us. Monsieur de Bois, who felt Madelaine was clinging to his arm as though her strength was failing, answered for her. The daughter of the Duc de Gramont has not become less noble, madame. Through her noble industry, she has not brought to her own or any other cheek a blush of genuine shame. I, who have watched over her from the hour that she left the Château de Gramont, claim the proud privilege of giving this testimony. No duchess has the right to hold her head higher than the Duc de Gramont's orphan daughter. Before anyone could reply, he led Madelaine from the room and out of the house. The movement which Maurice and Bertha at the same moment made to follow her was arrested by the countess. Before they had recovered themselves, Madelaine was seated in her carriage and had driven away. Monsieur de Bois was walking rapidly to his hotel. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 24. The Female Belligerents. Madelaine's residence was one of the most superb mansions in Washington, a spacious house built of white stone and located within a few minutes' walk of the Capitol. She was in the habit of seeking the beautiful Capitol grounds every fine morning, before the busy city was astir, accompanied by Ruth Thornton. The matinal hour devoted to this refreshing walk was to both maidens the calmest and happiest of the 24. In that peaceful hour they gained strength to encounter the petty vexations and désagréments incident to the at once humble and important vocation they had adopted. Buried deep in Madelaine's heart there was ever a sadness that could not be shaken off, but she turned the sunny side of her existence toward others and kept the shadow of her great sorrow for herself alone. Therefore her mien was ever tranquil, even cheerful. Possibly she suffered less than many whose griefs were not so heavy, because her meek, uncomplaining spirit tempered the bleak wind that blew over her bowed head, and rounded the sharp stones that would have cut her feet on their pilgrimage, had they stepped less softly. Thus she carried within herself the magic that drew from waspish circumstance its sharpest sting. The morning after Madelaine's reconnoitre with her relatives, a group of young women were sitting busily employed around a large table in Mademoiselle Melanie's workroom. Mademoiselle Victorine, the forewoman, and Mademoiselle Clemence, her chief assistant, were the only foreigners. They had been in Vignon's employment and had accompanied Madelaine to America. The other workwomen Madelaine had selected herself. Many of them were young girls, well-born and bred in luxury, who had been compelled by sudden reverses to earn a livelihood. Madelaine often wondered how so many of this class had been thrown in her way. In reality, this class is a frightfully numerous one, and she had an intuitive faculty of discovering those of whom it was composed. Not only did her instinctive sympathy attract her towards them, but Mr. Hilson, who was an active philanthropist, had been largely instrumental in pointing out young women who aspired to become self-helpers. Madelaine took an affectionate interest in teaching them a trade which almost rose to the dignity of a profession in her hands. She became their friend, adviser, and comforter, and thus experienced the delicious consolation of creating happiness for others after her own happiness had received its death-blow. The room in which the busy needlewomen were sitting was the farthest of a suite of rooms opening into each other on the second story. These apartments were somewhat lavishly furnished, but on the strictest good taste, and the eye was charmed by a profusion of choice plants blossoming in ornamental flower vases placed upon brackets on the wall, or of orchids floating in pendant luxuriance from baskets attached to the ceiling. Then Madelaine had not forgotten the picturesque use so often made of ivy in her native land, and had trained the obedient parasite to embower windows, or climb around the frame of mirrors, until the gilt background gave but golden glimmer through the dark green network of leaves. Each room was also supplied either with portfolios containing rare engravings, with musical instruments, or a library. Rich dresses were displayed upon skeleton frames in one apartment, mantles and out-of-door wrappings were exhibited in another, bonnets and headdresses were exposed to admiring view in a third. Near the window, not far from the table which was surrounded by the sewing women, stood a smaller table where Ruth was engaged coloring designs for the costumes. The gossip of the Washington beau monde very naturally furnished a theme for the lively tongues of the needlewomen. They picked up all the interesting items of fashionable news that dropped from the lips of the many lady loungers who amused themselves by spending their mornings at Mademoiselle Melanie's exhibition rooms, giving orders for dresses, bonnets, etc., examining new styles of apparel, discussing the most becoming modes, or idly chattering with the acquaintances who visited Mademoiselle Melanie upon the same important mission as themselves. Mademoiselle Victorine generally led the conversation at the working table, or rather, she usually monopolized it. It was a source of great exultation to her if she happened to have a piece of news to communicate, and this now chanced to be the case. "Something very important is to take place at this house, probably this very day," she began with a consequential air. "If Mademoiselle Melanie has a fault, it is that she makes no confidants, and I think I am fully entitled to her confidence. I should like to know what she could have done without me." "What indeed?" exclaimed several voices, for everyone was anxious to propitiate the forewoman by bestowing upon her the flattery which was essential to keep her in an equable state of mind. "When we think of the marvels," continued Mademoiselle Victorine, "that issue from these walls, the splendid figures that go forth into the world out of our creative hands, figures which, could they have been seen when they rise in the morning, would not be recognizable, we have cause for self-congratulation. And Mademoiselle Melanie gets all the credit for these metamorphoses, though we all know she does nothing herself. That is, she merely forms a plan, makes a sketch, selects certain colors, and that is all. The execution, the real work, is mine. Mine! I appeal to you, young ladies, to say if it is not mine." "Yes, certainly," said Abby, one of the younger girls. "But without Mademoiselle Melanie's sketch, without her ideas, her taste, what would—" There, you talk too fast. Mademoiselle Abby, you are always chattering. I say without me, Mademoiselle Melanie would never have attained her present elevated position. Without me, this establishment would never have been what it is, a very California of dressmaking. And in a little more than 4 years, what a fortune Mademoiselle Melanie has accumulated. That brings me back to the point from which I started. Does anyone know what is to happen shortly? She inquired, with an air of elation at being the only repository of a valuable secret. No, what is it? Asked numerous voices. Well, Mademoiselle Ruth, do you say nothing? Inquired the triumphant forewoman. Are you not anxious to know? Ruth, without lifting her head from the sketch she was coloring, answered, Yes, certainly, unless it should be something with which Mademoiselle Melanie does not desire us to be acquainted. Oh, hear the little saint, returned Victorine. She does not care for secrets. No, of course not. She is only jealous that anyone should know more than herself. She would not express surprise, not she, if I told her that Mademoiselle Melanie is about to pay down $10,000, the last payment, upon the purchase of this house, which makes it hers. Mademoiselle Victorine concluded with a violent shake of the brocade she was trimming. But did you learn this from good authority? Asked Esther, a slender, pale-faced girl. The very best. I heard Mrs. Hilson say so to some ladies whom she brought to introduce here, and you know Mr. Hilson transacts all business matters for Mademoiselle Melanie. Mrs. Hilson told her friends that Mademoiselle Melanie's establishment was a perfect mint, and fairly coined money. When I heard this assertion, I said to myself, how little people understand that without me, Mademoiselle Melanie would never have founded an establishment that was compared to a mint. Never! And yet she gets all the credit. But you see, began Esther. Victorine interrupted her. What a chatterbox you are, Mademoiselle Esther. You never get on with work here if you talk so much. Those festoons want spirit and grace. You must recommence them, or the dress will be a failure. I warn you. For whom is it? I have forgotten. It is Mrs. Gilmer's, and she expects to wear it at the grand ball to be given by Marchioness de Fleury. She will be mistaken, said Victorine. I know that she will not be invited. The Marchioness hates her. Mrs. Gilmer is the only rival whom Madame de Fleury takes the trouble to detest, and it makes me indignant to see a lady of her superlative fascinations annoyed by this little upstart American. One must admit that Mrs. Gilmer is very pretty. Her figure scarcely needs help, and she is so vivacious, and has so much aplomb, so much dash, that the notice she attracts renders her alarmingly ambitious. Still, for her to dare to contrast herself with the French ambassadress is an intolerable presumption, and I rejoice that she will get no invitation to the ball. How do you know that she will not be invited? Asked Esther. How do I know all that I do know? It is odd to notice with what perfect lack of reserve the ladies who visit us talk. They chatter away just as if they thought we were all human working machines, without ears or brains or memories. This singular hallucination makes it not difficult to become acquainted with certain secrets of fashionable life which one clique would not make known to another clique for the world. But this tittle-tattle, Esther began. Shoot, shoot, cried the four women. How you chatter, Mademoiselle Esther. One cannot hear oneself speak for you. Somebody has just entered the exhibition hall. Who is it? Mrs. Gilmer, as I am alive. Monsieur Dubois is with her. She has come to try her dress, I suppose. She may spare herself the pain, for she will not wear it at Madame de Fleury's ball. Ruth, whose duty it was to receive visitors and to summon Victorine if they had orders to give, rose and entered the adjoining apartment. Mrs. Gilmer was one of those light-headed and light-hearted women who flowed upon the topmost and frothiest wave of society, herself a glittering bubble. To win admiration was the chief object of her life. The breath of flattery wafted her upwards towards her heaven, that rapturous state which was heaven to her. To be the belle of every reunion where she appeared was a triumph she could not forego, and there were no arts to which she would not stoop to obtain this victory. Madame de Fleury was a woman of the same stamp, but with all the polish, grace, and refined coquetry which the social atmosphere of Paris imparts, and though she had far less personal beauty than Mrs. Gilmer, less mind, less wit, her capacity for using all the charms she possessed gave her vast advantage over the fair-featured young American. When Ruth entered the salon, Mrs. Gilmer was too much interested in her conversation with Monsieur du Bois to notice her, and continued talking with as much freedom as though she were not present. "I have my heart set upon it," she said, "and I tell you I must receive an invitation to this ball. Madame de Fleury positively shall not exclude me. I have already set in motion a number of influential pulleys, and I am not apt to fail when I make an earnest attempt." "I am quite sure of that," answered Monsieur du Bois gallantly. "Oh, what a love of a dress! What an exquisite design!" exclaimed Mrs. Gilmer, stopping delighted before a robe which had been commenced but was thrown over one of the mannequins, with a sketch of the completed costume attached to the skirt. "The blending of those pale shades of green and embroidery of gold wheat, with a scarlet poppy here and there, the effect is superb. The style, as the sketch shows, is perfectly novel. I am enchanted. Miss Ruth, I must have that dress, at any price. I must have it." "It is to go to New Orleans, madame," replied Ruth. "It is ordered by Mrs. Senator Lamott, and is to be worn at some grand wedding." "No matter, I tell you, I must have it. Where is Mademoiselle Victorine?" Ruth summoned the forewoman. Victorine advanced very deliberately, and her bearing had a touch of patronage and condescension. Mrs. Gilmer pleaded hard for the possession of the dress, but Mademoiselle Victorine appeared to take the greatest satisfaction in making her understand that its becoming hers was an impossibility. The more earnestly Mrs. Gilmer prayed, the more inflexible became the forewoman. As for repeating a design which had been invented for one particular person, that, she asserted, was against all rules of art. The original design might be feebly, imperfectly copied by another mantua-maker, but its duplicate could not be sent forth from an establishment of the standing of Mademoiselle Melanie's. Mrs. Gilmer, whose white brow was knitted with something very like a frown, remarked that she would talk to Mademoiselle Melanie on the subject by and by. "Mademoiselle Melanie does not usually reverse my decisions," replied the piqued forewoman, with an extravagant show of dignity. "We shall see," retorted Mrs. Gilmer. "Now let me choose a headdress for the opera tonight, something original. What can you invent for me?" "Really," answered Victorine, who was not a little irate at the suggestion that there could be any appeal from her verdict, "I do not feel inspired at this moment. I am quite dull. Nothing occurs to me out of my usual line." "Oh, you must think," pleaded the volatile lady. "Invent me something never before seen. Something with flowers will do, but let me have impossible flowers, flowers which have no existence, and which I shall not behold upon everyone else's head. Price is no object. My husband never refuses me anything, especially,"
she added in a lower tone to Monsieur du Bois, when he is jealous, and I find it is very useful, absolutely necessary, to begin the season by exciting a series of Othello pangs through which he becomes manageable. I feed the jealous flame all winter and add fresh fuel in the spring when I wish to indulge in various extravagances."
"A very diplomatic arrangement," remarked Monsieur du Bois.
"What a bonnet! What a beauty of a bonnet! What deliciously adjusted lace! How was it ever made to fall in such folds over that bunch of moss roses peeping out over those quivering leaves touched with dewdrops?"
"That bonnet belongs to Madame de Fleury," said Victorine with a malicious emphasis.
"Ah, indeed," returned Mrs. Gilmer, changing color. "I wonder what would become of Madame de Fleury were it not for her toilettes. If she were despoiled of her gay plumage, a very insipid, commonplace-looking personage would remain. I must say it is rather singular," she continued, growing warm in spite of herself. "But if I ever happen to look at anything particularly worth noticing, I am always told it is for Madame de Fleury. Is Mademoiselle Melanie in her drawing-room? She accessible at this moment?"
"She has just come in. Mademoiselle Ruth will conduct you to her," answered Victorine with an offended air.
"Monsieur du Bois, I will soon be back," said Mrs. Gilmer to her escort. "There are books in abundance in yonder library, rather an extraordinary piece of furniture for a dressmaker's salon, but Mademoiselle Melanie has so much tact, she foresaw that they might be useful on some occasions."
Mrs. Gilmer followed Ruth to Madelaine's own apartments, which were on the first floor. Victorine turned to the room where the sewing women were at work. Gaston selected a book and seated himself in a comfortable armchair. He had hardly opened the volume when the Marchioness de Fleury entered, accompanied by Lord Linden. As she descended from the carriage, she found his lordship promenading up and down before the house. He was overjoyed at this unlooked-for opportunity to obtain admission. Madame de Fleury saluted Gaston with one of her most gracious smiles. Victorine, catching sight of the Marchioness, hurried forward, saying to Ruth, "Do not trouble yourself, Mademoiselle Ruth. I will have the honor of attending upon Madame de Fleury."
"That is right, Mademoiselle Victorine, but I am going to intrude into your atelier of mysteries to see what chef-d'oeuvres you have in progress."
Judging from Madame de Fleury's tone, one might easily have supposed that she alluded to pictures or statues, and was about to reverently enter the studio of some mighty genius and wonder over his achievements in marble or on canvas. The apartment she invaded was one in which visitors were not usually invited or expected to enter. The gentlemen were left together. "I am in luck," said Lord Linden in an unusually animated tone. "My dear Monsieur du Bois, I am the happiest of men. I have encountered my unknown beauty at last. She passed me in a private carriage which stopped here and was dismissed. I saw her enter this house not a quarter of an hour ago. She did not perceive me and disappeared before I could accost her, but I am determined to keep watch until she made her exit, and then either to renew my acquaintance or follow her home and learn where she lived. She shall not give me the slip again." "Are you sure you have not made some mistake? I do not think there is any lady here at the moment except Mrs. Gilmer, whom I accompanied." "I am perfectly certain I could not be mistaken. I shall make some excuse for remaining here. I will select a shawl or mantle for my sister, who is one of this celebrated Mademoiselle Melanie's customers, and who will not be displeased at such an unprecedented attention." Before Monsieur du Bois could reply, the Marchioness returned with Victorine.
And you say my dress for this evening will be done in an hour. That is delightful. I am impatient to test its effects, and I am half inclined to wait until it is finished and take it home with me. It will be completed within the hour. I am occupied upon it myself, answered Victorine, in a fawning manner, very different from that by which the banker's wife had been kept in subjugation. "What an original idea!" cried Madame de Fleury, pausing before the uncompleted dress which had attracted the admiration of Mrs. Gilmer. "What an exquisite conception! Those blades of golden wheat and those scarlet poppies make the most perfect trimming for these ravishing shades of green, just the colours that become me most. That dress is a triumph, Mademoiselle Victorine. The design is Mademoiselle Melanie's, but the cut, the execution, they are mine," said the forewoman complacently. "And for whom is the dress intended? But I need hardly ask. I am determined that it shall be mine." "It was to be sent to New Orleans to Madame de la Motte, the wife of the distinguished senator, but I beg to assure Madame that she cannot be the judge of this attire. It is nothing now. In a few days, when it is completed, then Madame will be able to see we have surpassed ourselves in that dress." "You have indeed," ejaculated Madame de Fleury with fever. "But I claim it. You must invent something else for Madame de la Motte. Mademoiselle Melanie surely will not refuse me." "If the decision depended upon me, the dress would assuredly become Madame de Fleury's. Although design has been sent to Madame de la Motte, and has met with her approbation, but Mademoiselle Melanie is so frightfully conscientious. She would not disappoint a customer, or break her word, or give a design promised to one person to another for a kingdom. She is quite immovable, obstinately unreasonable on these points." "But I must have that dress," persisted the Marchioness. "I cannot be happy without it. I will implore Mademoiselle Melanie. She will drive me to despair should she refuse." "Mrs. Gilmer saw it a few moments ago, and was so enchanted that she did her utmost to make me promise that the dress would be hers." "Hers, indeed, that impertinent little pas nouveau!" replied Madame de Fleury. "I would never forgive Mademoiselle Melanie if she consented to anything of the kind. I suppose the banker's wife imagines this delicate green would tone down her milk-maid complexion, but she shall not try the experiment." At this moment Mrs. Gilmer herself re-entered. The Marchioness pretended not to be aware of her presence, and, turning to the dress in question, remarked, "Yes, this dress must be one of the 12 that I shall order to take with me to Maryland. 12 will suffice for 1 week. I hear that Mr. Meredith's estate could bear comparison with our European country residences. The toilettes of his guests should do honour to their host," she went on, addressing herself to Gaston. "There are but 30 guests invited, and I hear that the great indignation is felt by certain persons who are not included in the number." Madame de Fleury's shaft was directed towards Mrs. Gilmer, who was writhing with vexation at not forming one of the select party. Mrs. Gilmer heard and bit her lips with suppressed rage. 12 dresses!" cried Lord Linden. 12 dresses for 7 days? Quite a moderate supply, and I should not possibly get through a week with less," answered Madame de Fleury serenely. "You are invited, of course." Lord Linden replied in the affirmative. "And you, Monsieur de Bois?" inquired the Marchioness innocently, though she was quite aware that he would repeat his lordship's answer, for she had been consulted in regard to the guest whom it would gratify her to meet. Mrs. Gilmer, who was choking with vexation,
sought revenge in one of those petty maneuvers which women of the world thoroughly understand. She paused, in the most natural manner, before the hat which she had just extolled, and which she had just been informed was designed for Madame de Fleury, and said aloud, "What a pretty bonnet! Admirably suited to hide the defects of an uncertain complexion, and a hair of no color, neither light or dark. It is not too gay for coquettish either, just the thing for a woman of 30 who has begun to fade." "I beg pardon, madame, it is made for Madame de Fleury," answered Victorine reprovingly, and not immediately comprehending the intentional spite of Mrs. Gilmer's remark. "Indeed," returned the latter, still speaking as though she had no suspicion of the presence of the Marchioness. "Will it not be rather too young for her? It seems to me that those colors are a little too bright for a person of her age." "Madame de Fleury is present and may overhear you," whispered Victorine warningly.
"Ah, indeed. I did not perceive her. Much obliged to you for telling me, for she conceals her age so well that I would not mortify her by letting her suppose that I am aware of her advanced years," continued the malicious little lady in a very audible tone. Madame de Fleury was in reality but 25, and particularly sensitive on the subject of her age, or rather of her youth. She expected to be taken for 22 at the most, and was furious when Mrs. Gilmer talked of her bonnet as suitable to a person of 30. But when her spiteful rival had the audacity to suggest that Madame de Fleury had even passed that decisive period, she could scarcely contain her rage. By a sudden impulse she turned and faced the speaker. Both ladies made a profound curtsy, with countenances expressive of mortal hatred. Lord Linden could not help whisper to Gaston, "Feminine belligerents! Those courtesies were exchanged after the manner that men exchange blows. It is very strange," he continued, looking about. "I do not see my fair incognita, though she certainly entered here. I fancy the Marchioness intends to depart. I prefer to linger a while. There are several salons yonder. I will steal off quietly and take refuge where I can watch who passes." Lord Linden had hardly disappeared before the Marchioness remarked to Victorine, "You said my dress would be ready in an hour, Mademoiselle Victorine. I will take a short drive and return at that time. Let Mademoiselle Melanie know that I particularly wish to have an interview with her. I must see her about that unfinished dress, which certainly shall not go to New Orleans." She curtsied once more very profoundly to Mrs. Gilmer, and departed, quite forgetting Lord Linden, who was well pleased not to be missed. "Mademoiselle Melanie will not be so unjust as to let Madame de Fleury have that dress after refusing it to me," observed Mrs. Gilmer tartly. "If she is, I never more."
The threat was nipped in the bud, for she well knew no one could replace the sovereign modiste, and that the loss of Mrs. Gilmer's custom would not in the least affect Mademoiselle Melanie, who daily refused a crowd of applicants. Recovering herself, the banker's wife concluded by saying, "Madame de Fleury is to return in an hour. Very well. I will call somewhat later to learn Mademoiselle Melanie's decision. If the dress is not mine, it certainly must not be Madame de Fleury's. We shall see if Mademoiselle Melanie's boasted justice is found wanting, or if she acts up to her professions." Monsieur de Bois conducted Mrs. Gilmer to her carriage and returned to the salon, for he had an especial reason for desiring to see Madelaine, but, having called during the hours which she scrupulously devoted to her vocation, he did not feel at liberty to intrude in her private apartments. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 25 The Message. Shortly after Monsieur de Bois returned to the exhibition salons, Madelaine entered the workroom. Gaston could see her moving about the young girls, distributing sketches, making smiling comments upon the occupation of this one and that, pointing out defects or praising execution. Every face seemed to brighten when it was turned upon her, and every countenance wore an unmistakable expression of affection. We might, perhaps, except that of Mademoiselle Victorine, whose high opinion of her own abilities made her somewhat jealous of Madelaine's supremacy. Yet even she experienced an involuntary reverence for the head of the establishment, though golden dreams of some day leaping into her place were ever floating through the Frenchwoman's plotting brain. Beside the table where Ruth was painting, Madelaine made the longest pause. She seemed disposed to converse with her young favorite, and Ruth smiled so gratefully that Monsieur de Bois was half reconciled to the delay, though he had an important reason for wishing to exchange a few words with Madelaine as soon as possible. The interval before she passed out of the room to return to her boudoir appeared sufficiently tedious. Gaston followed her and said, "Will you grant me a few moments, or are you very busy this morning?" "Busy always," replied Madelaine, extending her hand to welcome him, "but seldom too busy to lack time for my best friend. Will you come to my own little sanctum?" The room to which Gaston followed her offered a striking contrast, in point of furniture, to those which they had just left. Madelaine's boudoir, though it had an air of inviting comfort, was adorned with almost rigid simplicity. The only approach to luxury was a tiny conservatory, which she had caused to be built, rendered visible by glass doors. Madelaine took her seat before the small rosewood table, and with a pencil in hand and a piece of drawing paper before her, said, "You will not mind my sketching as we talk. I have an idea floating through my head, and I want to throw it off on paper. I can listen and answer just as well with my fingers occupied." Well might Gaston contemplate her in silent and wondering admiration. Neither her countenance nor her manner betrayed any trace of the suffering she must have endured on the day previous. She seemed to have completely banished its recollection from her thoughts. Monsieur de Bois was fearful of touching upon the subject, it seemed so wholly to have vanished from her mind, yet his errand compelled him. "What courage, what perseverance you possess, Mademoiselle Melanie! It is incredible, inexplicable," he said at last, as he watched the delicate fingers moving over the paper. "There you err," answered Madelaine brightly. "It is at least very explicable, for it is in working that I find my strength, my inspiration, my consolation. It was work, incessant work, which sustained me when I determined to take a step from which my weaker, frailer part shrank, a step which utter wretchedness first suggested to me, which seemed terribly galling, oppressively revolting, which I ventured upon with inconceivable pain. Yet, as you have seen, I was enabled in time to look upon that step with resignation. I afterwards contemplated it with pride. I now regard it with positive pleasure. This could never have been had I not resolved to resist all temptation to brood over grief and turn to work as refuge from sorrow." "And it is really true, then, that you, a lady of noble birth, dropping from so high a sphere into one not merely humble but laborious, find your vocation a pleasure at last?" "It is most true," said Madelaine, lifting her beautiful eyes with such a radiant expression that the genuineness of her reply could not be doubted. when one has for years lived upon the bare suffrage of others, no matter how dear, when one has had no home except that which was granted through courtesy, compassion, charity, you cannot conceive how delicious it is to dream of independence, of a home of one's own. And this sweet dream has become reality to me more speedily and more surely than my most sanguine hopes dared to anticipate. Think in what a rapid, almost miraculous manner my undertaking has prospered, by what magic my former life, that of an aristocratic lady who employed herself little but without decided results, has been exchanged for the delights of a life of active use, bringing forth golden fruition. In a word, how suddenly my poverty has been turned to wealth, at all events to a certain promise of opulence. And the most delightful sense of all is the internal satisfaction of knowing that I have done this myself, unaided, save indeed by the kindness, the counsel, the invisible protection of such a friend as you are, and such a friend as Mr. Hilson has proved.
We have done nothing but watch and admire.
Nothing, answered Madelaine with gentle reproach. Who helped me carry out all my projects? When a man's hand was needed, who stretched out his? But always with such prudence and delicacy that I could not be compromised. How helpless I should have been in Paris without you, and how many mistakes might I have committed in America without Mr. Hilson's aid! Little did he think, when he dined at the Chateau de Gramont with a noble family, and asked one of its members to promise that if she ever visited America she would apprise him of her presence there, little could he imagine how soon she would make a home in his native land, and of what inestimable aid his friendship would be to her.
He has been truly serviceable, answered Gaston. His advice was always good, and in nothing better than in deciding you to take this house, which you at first thought too magnificent. He was wise also in persuading you to furnish it so luxuriously. He comprehended better than you and I did that a certain amount of pomp and show would make a desirable impression upon the inhabitants even of a republican country.
Yes, I have cause to thank him for that counsel, and when I reflect that this house, which I at first thought too splendid, will soon become my own, I can hardly believe my good fortune. Today or tomorrow I am to make the last payment of $10,000, and the house will be mine, clear of all encumbrance. I have the money ready, and probably before the night it will be paid. This very morning, when I returned home, as I entered the door, I could not but pause suddenly and say to myself, is this no dream? Have I a home of my own at last? Will this elegant mansion today become mine through the toil of—
Fairy fingers, interrupted Gaston.
Something magical, I am inclined to admit, returned Madelaine gaily. But had it not been for the earnest counsels of Mr. Hilson, I should never have felt justified in living in my present style. He convinced me that the money I expended in surrounding myself with all the elegances of life was laid out at interest, and I suppose he is right. These elegances have perhaps drawn the rich to my door.
What was it that drew the poor? Asked the Gaston. You have tried to keep your charities as secret from me as your noble birth was kept from others, but accident has made me acquainted with more than you are aware. I know with what liberal hands you have succored the needy.
Those who have endured the sharp sting of poverty themselves may well feel for the poor, replied Madelaine. And yet I do little enough for my poor human sisters and brothers. We are gossiping very idly. Did you not say that you particularly wished to speak to me? It was not simply to make these sage reflections, was it?
No, but I shrank from touching upon the subject while you seem so serene and happy.
I could not bear to recall the painful interview with your family yesterday, when when they cast me off, spurned me as one degraded. Do not fear to speak out. My aunt is implacable. I might have known that she would be, and Count Tristan is the same. What matter? You have no need of their affection, and yet the day will come, and they will all seek you, and be proud and glad to claim you. I say it, and I feel it. Madelaine shook her head. And they did not all throw you off. Was not Mademoiselle Bertha just what she always is? And was not Maurice, though he appeared to be so completely overwhelmed that he could not command his voice, was he not the same as ever? Was he the same, think you? Asked Madelaine eagerly. Yes, I am sure of it, and I come here today as his messenger, or rather the herald of his coming. Madelaine trembled in spite of herself. The thought of beholding Maurice once more, of conversing with him, of listening to him, affected her too strongly for her to be able to even assume indifference. Monsieur de Bois regarded her with an air of exultation. I have judged you rightly, then, and you are unchanged. Maurice is not less dear to you than— Madelaine's hand, appealingly lifted, checked him. For a few moments she remained silent. When her tranquillity was somewhat restored, she said slowly, but in an altered tone, You are messenger of Maurice. What did he request you say to me? He commissioned me to let you know that he earnestly desired an interview with you at once, and alone, free from interruption. He entreats you to receive him today. I promised him, as soon as I could make known to you his petition, that I would return to him with your answer. He awaits it impatiently. What answer shall I give him? He may come, answered Madelaine, in a tone of suppressed emotion. I will tell him that he may be here in an hour, said Gaston interrogatively, for he saw the mighty struggle Madelaine was making to control herself, and thoughtfully desired to give her some little time for preparation. Madelaine bowed her head in acquiescence. Gaston had too much delicacy to prolong the conversation. He bade her adieu, and at once sought Maurice. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 26 Meeting of Lovers. Monsieur de Bois lost no time in communicating to Maurice the result of his visit. He found the young Vicomte awaiting him with torturing impatience. Gaston had scarcely said that Madelaine would receive her cousin in an hour, when Maurice, without heeding the last words, caught up his hat, convulsively grasped his friend's hand, and, without uttering a syllable, hurried forth. He was acquainted with Madelaine's residence. He had sought it out the night previous, and thither he now hastened. He bounded up the street door steps, but paused a moment as his hand touched the bell. Was he again about to look upon that face which he had sought with such fruitless but frenzied ardor? He thought of those days when all creation became a blank, because that heaven-lit countenance no longer shone upon him. His brain and heart throbbed and beat at those tumultuous recollections until both seemed mingled in one wild motion. He comprehended Madelaine's character so well that he knew he should find her tranquil and self-possessed. And was he about to enter her presence as voiceless and unmanned as during their brief rencontre the day previous? He turned to descend the steps in the hope of collecting his scattered faculties by walking a while, but the very thought of delaying, even for a few moments, an interview for which he had so long pined caused him too sharp anguish for endurance. He seized the bell and rang with a sudden impulse, as though he feared the mansion before which he stood would vanish away, and he would wake from one of those old dreams by which he had been haunted. The door opened, and he was at once conducted to Madelaine's boudoir. Madelaine was still sitting before the little table where Gaston de Bois had left her. The sketch she had commenced lay before her, and the pencil beside it, but though she had not moved from her seat, the drawing had not received an additional touch. As Maurice entered, she rose and advanced towards him, stretching out both her hands. Closely clasped those extended hands, he gazed upon her with an expression of rapture. For a moment the large, clear windows of her soul opened as naturally and frankly as ever, but his look was so full of unutterable tenderness that over her betraying eyes the lids dropped suddenly, and her face crimsoned. It might be with happiness which she felt bound to conceal. Madelaine was the first to speak, but the only words she murmured were, "Maurice, my dear cousin." How her accents thrilled him! How they brought back the time when that voice, which made all the music of his existence, suddenly hushed. Awful silence took its place, leaving the memory of departed tones ever sounding in his aching, longing ears. "Madelaine, have I found you at last? Oh, how long have we been lost to each other!" "You have never been lost to me," answered Madelaine involuntarily, but the words were hardly spoken when she repented them. "I know it. Monsieur de Bois kept you informed of my movements. But, ah, Madelaine, how could you be aware of my anguish, and so cruelly refuse a sign by which I might learn that you were near me?" "I had no alternative. I could not have carried out the project I had formed, and which—" Madelaine paused, and looked around her somewhat proudly, then added, "and which you now see crowned with success. If I had run the risk of your tracing me, you would have opposed my undertaking. Do you not feel that you would? Answer that question before you reproach me." "Yes, you are right, Madelaine. I fear I should have opposed your enterprise. And yet, believe me, I honor it. I honor you all the more on account of that undertaking. Thank heaven I have lived long enough in this land, where men, and women too, have sufficient courage to use their lives, and senseless idlers are the exceptions, to realize that men's work and women's work are alike glorious, that labor is dignified by the hand that toils, and that you, Madelaine, the daughter of a duke, you, the Duchess Mantua Maker, have reached a higher altitude through that very labor than your birth could ever command." "Maurice, my cousin, my dear, dear cousin, these words compensate me for all my trials and struggles. I hardly dared to dream that I should hear them from your lips. Ah, today, when I am about to accomplish one of the ends for which I have most earnestly toiled, today when I shall become full possessor of this mansion, henceforth a home of my own, this day will ever be full of precious memories to me. It will ever be written upon my book of life, moistened with the sweetest tears I ever shed, tears of gratitude and joy." "You are to purchase this magnificent mansion? Is it possible?" asked Maurice, for the first time looking around him. "How can you have achieved this, Madelaine? You have had some friend who aided you, and—" He paused abruptly. "I have had friends, Maurice, warm and devoted friends," answered Madelaine simply. "But," he resumed, and hesitated, how has all this been brought about?" "Oh, Madelaine, I have not forgotten, I cannot forget the sad revelation you made to me in Brittany. He whom you love, it is he who has protected you, who has enjoyed the exquisite happiness of aiding you by his advice, and by his own means, perhaps, Maurice uttered these words excitedly, and almost in a tone of reproach. "No, Maurice," returned Madeleine, growing ghastly pale, and speaking with an effort which gave her voice a hollow, unnatural sound. "He whom I love has never aided me. I have received no assistance from him. I have given him no right to offer any." "He whom you love!" repeated Maurice with culminating anguish. "Then you love him, you do love him still? Answer me, Madeleine. Do not torture me by suspense. Answer me. You love him still?" "As ever," replied Madeleine, and an irrepressible blush chased the ashy whiteness of her cheeks. "And he is here in America, here in Washington?" asked Maurice. "Yes." "And you see him? You have seen him perhaps this very day?" "Yes." "And he loves you as much as ever?" Madeleine silently bowed her head, but the radiant light that overspread her countenance answered more unmistakably than the affirmative action. "Ah, Madeleine, can you think, can you believe that his love equals mine? You do not answer. Speak, I implore you. Do you believe that he has loved you as much as I love you?" Madeleine felt impelled to reply, because she deemed it best for Maurice to be confirmed in his error. In a low, tremulous tone, with her eyes swimming in soft lustre of a half-formed tear, she murmured, "Yes." "No, no, it cannot be," burst forth Maurice. "No woman has ever loved twice with such absorbing devotion. You cannot be to him what you are to me. You cannot have saved him from all the perils from which you have saved me. Ah, Madeleine, since you have been selected to fill the place of guardian angel to me, why was my love rejected? Why did another rob me of your heart? Why are you willing to unite your faith to his and not to mine?" "Maurice," said Madeleine, regaining some degree of composure, "I shall never forget the noble offer you made when I was a desolate outcast. I shall never forget the joy it gave me, the gratitude it caused me, the good it did me, at the very moment when I was forced to reject that offer. But had there been no other barrier, could I have consented to become a burden to you? I, poor and friendless, could I have consented to draw down the anger of your family upon you? Could I have consented to separate you from them, to make a lasting feud between you? Say, Maurice, would you have had me to do this?" "I would have had you leave me still a hope upon which I could have existed, until I had fitted myself to enter an honorable profession, until I had a prospect of earning independence through that profession, until I had the right to say to you, as I now might, were you but mine in heart, 'Madeleine, I have waited patiently and toiled earnestly. Will you share my narrow means, my almost poverty? Will you be my wife? We might be exiles, so to speak, for we should perhaps have been cast off by our own kindred, and might never have returned to our native land, but your presence would have made this new country, this young Hercules of lands, this land full of sinews, bones, and muscles, not yet clothed with the rounded symmetry of outward form, but fresh and strong and teeming with promise, a true home to us. Its vast, ever-growing mind would have given new expansion to our own mental faculties. We should have grown spiritually and reached noble heights together. If we had griefs to endure, grief itself would have been sweet to me if we drank it from the same cup. All this might have been, Madeleine, if you loved me as I love you." Madeleine passed her hand over her eyes as if to shut out some picture of blinding brightness conjured before him by these words, and, looking up with forced serenity, said, "Maurice, though I cannot be your wife, do you refuse to let me take the place of a sister? a sister who loves you with the most tender affection, who will rejoice in your joy and share in your sorrow. Look upon her own life as brighter if she brightens yours. Since it has been the will of heaven that we should meet again before the time I proposed arrived, there is no need that we should become strangers to each other, because I cannot be all that you desire. Will you not reject such affection as I can offer you?" "Reject it? No rejection has emanated from your side," he continued bitterly. "I was and am unworthy of your affection, your confidence, but what I will grant I will thankfully receive, too poor not to feel enriched even by your coldest regard." "Will you prove that to me, Maurice?" "Yes. How can I do so?" "By promising that you will never have a sorrow which you do not confide to me, by promising that you will never doubt my ready sympathy, more yet, by giving me an invaluable privilege, one which will make me proud indeed. Do not be offended, Maurice, but should you ever need means to carry out any enterprise, and you know in this land how many offer themselves, I would claim the privilege of being your banker, and joining in your undertaking as freely as if I were indeed your sister. You, Madelaine, can you imagine that I could force myself to consent to this? Are you already rich, then?" "I am becoming rich. I have laid the foundation of wealth. But tell me that you would not reject my sisterly regard, my devotion." "Would he whom you love permit this devotion?" "Yes," answered Madelaine, smiling gravely. "It would not render him wretched? It would not exasperate him?" questioned Maurice. "No." "He is not jealous, then?" "Yes, I fear he is, very jealous, but not of you." "And yet he has cause," returned Maurice, with a violence which he could not control, "more cause than I trust he has of being jealous of any other man. And there may be, must be, other men who aspire to love you. Your position, Madelaine, must expose you at times to impertinence. You must need protection." "I have a talisman within which protects me ever," answered Madelaine. "Ah, I know. The love you bear him, my rival. Let us not speak of him. I cannot endure it. Let us ever banish him from our conversation." "I did not mean to make you suffer," said Madelaine soothingly. Before he could reply, Victorine entered with a mysterious air. Her countenance intimated that she had a matter of the utmost importance upon her mind. Habituated to some of the little pleasant and supposed to be harmless customs of her own country, she could not comprehend that Mademoiselle Melanie appeared to have no lovers, that she entertained no gentleman in particular. Monsieur de Bois was so openly her friend, that mystery never attached itself to his visits. Mr. Hilson was a frequent visitor, but he was a married man, whose wife and daughters were among the most zealous of Mademoiselle Melanie's patrons. Victorine was always on the qui-vive for the accession of a lover, as a necessary appendage to one in Mademoiselle Melanie's position, and at this moment she felt as though she had a clue to some intrigue. Instead of speaking in an audible tone, she approached Madelaine, and, glancing dubiously at Maurice, said in a whisper, "Mademoiselle, I have something to communicate." "What is it?" said Madelaine, without the slightest embarrassment. "A gentleman desires to see Mademoiselle Melanie immediately, and in private," whispered Victorine. "He said particularly in private, and evidently he is desirous of not being seen. He was quite confused when that stupid valet ushered him into the exhibition rooms, but fortunately I came to his assistance. He was so anxious to escape observation that he would follow me downstairs. I therefore ushered him into Mademoiselle's private drawing-room." "Did you not ask his name?" inquired Madelaine quietly. "He would not give his name, mademoiselle. He said I must deliver you this note when no one was by, or slip it in your hand unperceived." She spoke in a whisper and gave the note with her back turned to Maurice, probably supposing that he was not aware of its delivery. Madelaine broke the seal quite openly. At the first line, however, she changed color and was visibly disturbed. Victorine, who was watching her closely, exulted in secret. Maurice perceived Madelaine's agitation with surprise and pain. A suspicion that the letter was from his rival could not be escaped. "What is it?" he asked impulsively. "I cannot tell you," replied Madelaine, hastily refolding the letter. "Can you not tell me from whom this letter comes?" "No, no," she replied with unusual vehemence. "Alas, I know too well," returned Maurice sadly. "But why should you be agitated and troubled by what he says? What right has he to give you pain?" "You must leave me at once," cried Madelaine nervously. Victorine was enchanted. The plot thickened. Here was a mystery, and she held the clue to it. It was very plain that Mademoiselle Melanie did not wish these two gentlemen to meet. "Victorine, you will conduct Monsieur," said Madelaine. "I do not wish him to leave by the front entrance. You will conduct him through the garden." There was a private entrance into the street through the large garden at the back of the house, but this was the first time that Victorine had ever received an order to show any visitor out that way, and she felt she was beginning to be admitted into Mademoiselle Melanie's confidence, an honor for which she had long sighed. Maurice was about to remonstrate, but Madelaine said to him imploringly, "Can you not trust me? Will you not consent to my wishes, and trust to their being explained some future day?" Maurice, though tormented by the keenest pangs of jealousy, could not resist this appeal. "I trust you ever, Madelaine," he replied, taking up his hat. "When may I see you again?" "When you choose. You're always welcome. But go now. Show Monsieur through the garden, Victorine." Victorine smiled a mysterious assent. Maurice followed her out of the room, but Madelaine's intention was unexpectedly frustrated. The visitor whom Victorine had ushered into the drawing-room had followed her unnoticed to the small entry which led into Madelaine's boudoir. The forewoman and Maurice had only taken a few steps when they encountered him. Maurice exclaimed in astonishment, "Good heavens, my father!" "You here, Maurice?" returned the Count in a severe tone. "Are you not here, my father?" "That is different," answered the Count, hiding his annoyance beneath a frigid air. "You know what your grandmother said. She would be indignant if she knew of this visit, and you must be aware that it does not meet with my approval." "Have I reason to think so when I find you here also?" replied Maurice in a manly tone. "I come as the head of the family, and to talk upon a family matter of great importance. I do not, however, wish that my visit here should be known to anyone. You understand me? It is not to be mentioned." "Be assured I shall not mention it," said Maurice, bowing and moving onward. As the gentlemen met, Victorine concluded there was now no need of showing the way through the garden entrance. She opened the door of the boudoir to admit Count Tristan, and led the way to the entrance from the street. Maurice did not comprehend why Madelaine's orders were disregarded, for he never suspected that his father was the writer of the note. At the sound of the footstep on the stair, the Vicomte raised his head, and caught sight of a gentleman who had commenced descending, but suddenly turned back, as though he also did not wish to be seen. He could not, however, disappear before Maurice had recognized Lord Linden. Why should Lord Linden have so rapidly retreated when he thought he might be seen? Could this languid, blasé nobleman be the man Madelaine loved? Could she have been acquainted with him in France? When could their acquaintance have commenced? Why had she never mentioned him? It was very singular. Maurice left the house he had entered with such joyous sensations, sadly and slowly. Madelaine was found at last, yet Madelaine was again lost to him. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 27. Count Tristan's Policy. When Count Tristan was ushered into Madelaine's presence, he was received not perhaps with warmth, but with marked courtesy. Nothing in her greeting betrayed that his past conduct was remembered, and yet nothing in her manner indicated that their relationship was unforgotten. Her demeanor was simply that which would have been natural and appropriate in receiving, beneath her own roof, one who was almost a stranger. The Count had been completely disconcerted by the unexpected meeting with his son. His wily smoothness was too much ruffled for him to couch his first words in polite language. He could not forbear saying, "I entertained the hope that my visit would be private. It is very unfortunate that I encountered Maurice. It will give him cause to think that I am opposed to his grandmother's course." He smoothed over this slip of the tongue by adding, "And certainly so I am. I disapprove of her excessive rigor. Her conduct towards you does not meet with my full sanction." It was the unintentional expression of Madelaine's countenance, perhaps, which made Count Tristan remember that his own conduct had strongly resembled that of his mother. But his auditor spoke no word. She was too kind to utter her thoughts, and too frank to say what she did not think. The Count went on. "I could not yield to my strong impulse yesterday and defend you. It would not have done. My mother would only have been exasperated. I was forced to apparently agree with her. The sacred title of mother, which is never to be forgotten, compelled me to yield to her in this respect, a respect due alike to her years and to her position. But now that we are alone, I may tell you how pained, how grieved I was at the occurrences of yesterday." "I no longer think of them," replied Madelaine. "As I said," continued the Count, "when you left us so mysteriously in Brittany, however troubled we might have been at your sudden step, however anxious about your welfare, it was useless to be indignant, since we thought your course the right one, and you were ever conscientiousness personified. Besides, it should always be taken into consideration that, come what might, you were still our relation, the ties of blood indissoluble. I said to my mother, 'It can never be forgotten that Madelaine is your niece.'" "I would have had her forget it," replied Madelaine. "I preserved my incognita, and kept at a distance from you all, that you might not be wounded by my remembrance. But be sure, Madelaine, that I, for one, cannot forget our relationship, nor cease to treat you as my niece." Madelaine could not but be touched by this unexpected declaration. She answered gratefully, "It is more than I ask, yet I thank you." "Yes," returned the Count, "and to prove to you how far I am from looking down upon you, how much I honor your position, and how highly I esteem you, how thoroughly I comprehend your character, and the readiness with which you always serve others, I come here today to ask a favor at your hands." "Is it possible?" exclaimed Madelaine delightedly. "You make me truly happy,
Can I indeed serve you? You scarcely have spoken the words that have more power to gladden me."
"That is precisely what I imagined," answered the Count complacently. "Now let me explain the matter. You have often heard me speak of the property left to Maurice by his uncle. It is now almost our sole possession. Its value depends upon the railroad which may or may not run through that portion of the country. A committee of 9 persons has been selected to decide whether this road shall run to the right or left. If they choose the road to the right, the property of Maurice will not be benefited, and I cannot enter into particulars, but it is almost valueless. If they choose the left road, the value of the estate will be so much increased that it will yield us, that is, it will yield my son something very handsome. Of this committee, Mr. Hilson and Mr. Meredith will vote for the left road, and through the influence of Madame de Fleury, for which I am much indebted to you, Monsieur de Fleury's banker, Mr. Gobert, will also vote for the left. That secures us 3 votes. How glad I am that I was able to accomplish something to serve you," said Madelaine. "There is much more, I trust, that you will be able to accomplish. The votes of Mr. Gilmer and Mr. Rutledge must be gained, the only 2 which it seems impossible to obtain, for the other gentlemen are inflexible in their decision. Mrs. Gilmer is one of your customers. I hear that she raves about you. If that is the case, you can do anything with her, and she will manage her husband. Have you no mode of winning her over to our side?" Madelaine pondered a moment, then answered gaily, "Yes, I have at my command one method that is certain, perfectly certain. Mrs. Gilmer is very desirous of receiving an invitation to Madame de Fleury's ball. The Marchioness has left her out on purpose. Mrs. Gilmer has made numerous efforts, but thus far unsuccessful ones, to obtain this invitation. If I could secure it for her, she would gladly repay me by inducing her husband to vote as you desire." "Bravo, bravo! We shall succeed, for you can surely obtain the invitation. Madame de Fleury herself said that she was enchanted at the opportunity of obliging you, that she could not do too much to show her great consideration." "Yes, but you can scarcely comprehend the difficulty of persuading her to consent to invite Mrs. Gilmer. She mortally detests her, and I could offer few petitions which she would be less likely to grant. Still, I will use strong arguments, powerful inducements. I will endeavor to think of some temptation which she cannot resist." "That is just what I believed you would do, my dear Madelaine," said the Count, taking her hand. Madelaine withdrew it, though not too abruptly. The contact gave her, magnetically as it were, a painful impression. "But how," she asked, "is Mr. Rutledge to be reached?" Through you again, my good, kind Madelaine," answered the Count hilariously. "Through me? I do not know him except by name. He is a bachelor. Therefore there is no wife who can be induced to become a mediator." "No, there is no wife, to be sure, but there is a lady love whom he hopes to make his wife, and she also is one of your patrons. It is the sister of Lord Linden. You might solicit her, or you might obtain her influence through his lordship." "Through his lordship? That might not be possible," replied Madelaine decisively. "Surely it may be," remarked the Count, "since you are acquainted with him, and I have faith in your powers of persuasion." Madelaine looked very much astonished as she answered, "What has made you imagine that I have any acquaintance with Lord Linden?" "I saw him upstairs in one of your salons, sitting in a comfortable armchair, as though he were very much at home reading a book." Madelaine looked confused. "Lord Linden?" "Yes, you will therefore admit that it was quite natural for me to suppose that he had the entrée here?" "I did not know he was in the house." returned Madelaine ingenuously. "He has never been here before, to my knowledge. I was once thrown in contact with him in traveling from New York to Washington. The cars met with an accident, and he broke his arm, and I, being unhurt, was of some little assistance, but I have never seen him since." "Then it is a most fortunate chance," resumed Count Tristan, "that brings him here. Through him you can influence his sister. Through her the vote of Mr. Rutledge will be secured. And, these two votes gained, the road to the left will be chosen, and for this I shall be wholly your debtor. Truly, Madelaine, you are the fairy Maurice used to call you in old times, for you have the power, the gift of working wonders, and you always had." "Cousin Tristan," began Madelaine seriously, then paused. "Do you allow me still to call you so?" Yes, undoubtedly, and especially when we are alone. Call me cousin, certainly. But what do you wish to say?" "You must find some other advocate as far as Mr. Rutledge is concerned. I fear I have not sufficient influence with the Lady Augusta Linden to make this request, or to induce her to grant it, or to prevent her thinking the petition itself an impertinence." "That does not matter. You can manage the affair through Lord Linden, and the opportunity presents itself this very moment, since he is here under your own roof." "I cannot see him. I particularly desire not to see him. There are reasons which must prevent my asking any favor at his hands. It is totally out of my power to do what you desire." "But it is of the greatest importance, Madelaine. This opportunity must not be thrown away. What would Maurice think if he believed that you refused to serve him at such a critical moment?" "Maurice, if he knew all which I could tell him, would be the first to forbid my appealing to Lord Linden. I pray you, seek some other means of influencing Mr. Rutledge. He cannot be reached through me." "I have no other," cried the Count with desperate energy. "My sole dependence is upon you, and, Madelaine, this is not a mere question of gain. More than I dare confide to you depends upon the decision of that committee." Madelaine made no response, but her manner plainly manifested that she was not prepared to retract what she had said. "Madelaine," continued the Count with ill-disguised anger, and feeling that he had no alternative but to make a confession which humbled him to the dust, "this property was held in trust by me. My difficulties, my embarrassments, have been overwhelming. They have brought me to the verge of absolute ruin. A man may be placed in positions where he is forced into actions from which he would otherwise shrink. This is my case. I have obtained from Maurice a power of attorney which he thinks I have never used, but, impelled by my troubles, and without his knowledge, I have been induced. Women cannot understand business manners. It is a course that could not be avoided. I have been forced to compromise the interest of Maurice. I have been compelled to mortgage his estate so heavily that it is valueless unless this road augments its present worth. Do you not see what is at stake? Will you not exert yourself to save me, to save Maurice from the mortification of knowing that I committed an action which might be misconstrued, which might be condemned, might be considered—" The Count paused, overcome with shame. Madelaine hesitated. For the sake of Maurice, she could endure to be misunderstood. She could submit to place herself in a position which humbled and compromised her. The Count saw that her resolution was shaken, and he did not lose his advantage. "Remember that Maurice is beginning life. He has imbibed the sanguine spirit of the land in which he has lately lived. What a sudden and crushing blow to him will be the revelation that awaits him. Can you bear to contemplate its effect? I cannot. Answer, Madelaine. He has suffered much, much for your sake. Will you make him suffer more?" "No," answered Madelaine firmly.
Come what may, I will see Lord Linden and obtain his influence with his sister, if I can."
There spoke the Madelaine of other days.
Madelaine interrupted him. "Spare me your praises. I do not deserve them. If Lord Linden is here, as you say, I will see him at once."
"That is right. You are prompt as ever. I will take my leave. It may not be well for him to see me here. Success to you, Madelaine. But you always command success. It is a condition of your existence."
The Count withdrew, and Madelaine, with a sad countenance, only waited until the street door closed upon him to keep her promise and seek Lord Linden. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 28. Lord Linden's Discovery. Lord Linden, who had resolved not to leave the house until he had discovered his incognita, waited with laudable patience, closely scanning every lady who passed through the adjoining apartments. His position did not command a view of the workroom. An hour passed, and he began to get puzzled. The non-appearance of the lady who had entered the house was inexplicable unless she resided there. His perplexity was momentarily increasing when he saw Count Tristan in conversation with the forewoman. They had left the apartment together. It then occurred to Lord Linden that there might be other exhibition rooms in the lower story, and he had better reconnoitre. He made up his mind to do this, and was descending the stair when he caught sight of Maurice de Gramont and involuntarily retreated. What was Count Tristan doing here? What had brought his son here? Neither of the gentlemen were accompanied by ladies. He returned to his former station, uncertain what step to take next. Just then Victorine passed through the apartment on her way to the workroom. He accosted her and inquired if there were exhibition rooms on the lower floor. She informed him that the first story was reserved by Mademoiselle Melanie for her own use. Lord Linden returned to his armchair and had just made up his mind that the lady of whom he was in search had visited Mademoiselle Melanie in her own apartments and left the house again, when he was startled, astounded, and overjoyed by the sight of the very being he sought, tranquilly approaching him. Madelaine looked serious, even sad, for she had consented to stoop to an action which mortified her deeply. Lord Linden was so thoroughly amazed at her sudden appearance that he could not move, could not collect himself to address her. She curtsied and said with grave sweetness, "I was only informed a few moments ago of your presence here, my lord." Lord Linden rose and stammered out, "Is it possible? Do I really behold you? This morning I saw you enter this house. I gained my admission as Madame de Fleury's escort, and lingered in hope of seeing you after she left." Lord Linden did not know how to proceed. He had expected to encounter his incognita wearing her hat and mantle. He had supposed that her visit was to the residence of the celebrated couturier, and was to make some purchase. To behold her so apparently at home bewildered him. Madelaine perfectly comprehended his perplexity, and with perfect composure attempted to clear away the mist from his mind by saying, "I beg pardon. I was not aware you accompanied Madame de Fleury. As I have the honour of numbering Lady Augusta Linden, your lordship's sister, among my customers, I thought—" "Customers? Your customers? You are, then, Mademoiselle Melanie, the mantua-maker?" answered Madelaine with an unfaltering voice. "You? Can it be?" Pointing in the direction of the workroom, she answered with a half-smile, "Yonder are a number of witnesses who can testify to my identity."
Lord Linden, trying to conceal the shock he had received, and gazing upon her with admiration, exclaimed in an impassioned tone, "Ever since I first met you, when you were returning from New York," broke in Madelaine, "where I went to choose silks and velvets from other feminine paraphernalia for the use of my customers." Lord Linden looked discomfited. After a moment he went on, "I have sought you everywhere. I was certain I would find you in the first drawing-rooms in Washington." "You find me in a salon, which a great many ladies visit before they enter those drawing-rooms. It is incredible. To me it seems very comprehensible," answered Madelaine stoically. He looked into her lovely countenance and continued, with increasing fervour, "I have never ceased to think of you. No other woman has had power to efface your image. Having known you, without ever suspecting who and what you are," Madelaine interrupted him, "now that you are aware of who I am and what I am, my lord, it becomes easier to dissipate any illusion which it owes in its origin to a mystery with which you are pleased to surround me." "To exchange my illusions, perhaps, for others more captivating, more poetic," resumed the nobleman. "Do you talk of poetry, my lord, to a mantua-maker? Say, rather, to one who, in spite of her vocation, inspires me with the most absolute veneration. I swear to you, but no, my actions, not my words, must prove my admiration. You shall find me ever at your command. I shall count it my greatest happiness in life to devote myself to your service." "My lord, you tempt me to put your words to the test." "Do, I pray you. It is what I desire most." "By a singular chance," said Madelaine, "one of those marvellous coincidences which sometimes occur in real life, but which look like fiction when they are related in books, an opportunity presents itself that may enable you to prove the sincerity of your protestations. You must understand that I am a woman of business, but that is easily comprehended, as I am a woman who toils for her daily bread. I take great interest in the decision of the committee of a certain railroad company, one of the members of which I desire to influence." Lord Linden looked stupefied, and almost as if he thought Madelaine were making jest of him, but her grave manner contradicted that suggestion. She went on as tranquilly as before. "They are to decide at their next meeting whether a certain railroad shall take the direction to the right or left. I desire that the left road should be chosen." Lord Linden still regarded her as though he were too completely astounded to make any comment. "Certain members of the committee will, I am aware, vote for the left road. I wish to secure the vote of Mr. Rutledge." "Mr. Rutledge?" exclaimed Lord Linden. "I know him well." "He is the warm admirer of Lady Augusta Linden," observed Madelaine. "It is even reported that he aspires to her hand." Lord Linden showed plainly that he was astonished to find one in Madelaine's position so conversant with the affairs of both of the business world and of the beau monde. Madelaine proceeded. "If any influence can be used with Mr. Rutledge to induce him to vote for the left road, it will cause me gratification. I cannot explain of what nature. You have spoken, my lord, of desiring to serve me. I have very frankly pointed out in what manner it was possible that you might confer a favour upon me. If I could enter into full particulars, this request would lose its singularity. As that cannot be done, I can only entertain the hope that you will believe it is an interpretation which I should not blush to reveal." "That I feel, of that I am certain," returned the nobleman earnestly. "No one could look at you and doubt the nobility of your actions and motives. I am almost hardy enough to venture to promise Mr. Rutledge's vote. Will you permit me to return here after I have spoken with him, and to report to you the result of my advocacy?" Before Madelaine could reply, Mrs. Gilmer entered the adjoining room. Madelaine rose and, curtsying to her visitor, said, "Your lordship will excuse me. My duty requires that I should leave you and attend to this lady." She glided out of the room, but Lord Lyndon continued to watch her, as though he could not force his eyes away. It was some time before he made his exit. Mrs. Gilmer was looking very much depressed. She had begun to believe that it was very possible she would receive no invitation to Madame de Fleury's ball.
Mademoiselle Melanie," she said as Madelaine entered, "you will sympathize with me. I have never had such a mortification before. I knew Madame de Fleury's enmity, but I could not believe her so cruel, so inhuman. She is so thoroughly devoid of feeling, and has determined to leave me out of her invitations. I actually induced the Russian ambassadress, with whom she is very intimate, to intercede for me. I have just seen Madame Orlovsky, and she tells me Madame de Fleury refused point blank. She resisted Madame Orlovsky's most urgent entreaties, and will not yield to anyone. I have no longer any hope. I shall be excluded from this ball, of which all Washington is talking. How am I to survive such a slight?"
"It, however, may still be possible," said Madelaine, smilingly, "to obtain you an invitation."
"You think so? You really think so?" cried Mrs. Gilmer in joyful surprise. "Do not raise my hopes to the highest pitch to cast them down again, unless you want to make me ill for a month. Who could have the power to obtain me an invitation after the Russian ambassadress has been refused?"
"It sounds very presumptuous to say so, but I may have."
"You? My dear Mademoiselle Melanie, you? I can well believe it. Madame de Fleury adores you. She owes all her success to you. Oh, I know it well enough, though you may pretend to be ignorant of what you have done for her. You seriously think you can get me this invitation? You will positively make the effort?"
"I will use my best endeavors, and I am pretty sure I shall succeed. But it is to be the return for the favor which I desire you to grant me."
"A favor? You can ask none that I will not grant in return for this invitation," replied Mrs. Gilmer eagerly.
Madelaine could scarcely repress a smile, tinged with a slightly scornful expression. "You American ladies are said to be all-powerful with your husbands. You, no doubt, have a great influence with Mr. Gilmer?"
"I fancy I have," said Mrs. Gilmer, tossing her graceful head. "I arrange matters so as to have him in my power. I know his weak points, and I make it my rule to play upon them until I obtain everything I desire. Just at this moment he is in a particularly favorable state. He is frantically jealous, though, between ourselves, I never give him real cause. I only excite his jealousy to use it as a valuable weapon against himself. Tell me quickly what favor you desire."
"Mr. Gilmer is a member of a committee which is to decide upon the course a certain railroad is to take. I wish to secure his vote for the left road."
"How odd! What difference can it make to you?"
"It would occupy too much time to explain that, and it might not interest you. The important question is, can he be induced to vote for this left road?"
"I dare say. I do not doubt it. That is, if you are really in earnest, and can promise me my invitation to the ball in exchange for his vote."
"The one depends upon the other," replied Madelaine. "I had the good fortune to secure the vote of Mr. Gobert, the banker of Monsieur de Fleury, and—"
"Mr. Gobert votes for the left row? Ah, that increases difficulty. My husband makes a point of never voting as he does. Never. It is enough that Mr. Gobert votes one way for him to vote the other.
That is singular. They are both bankers, and I thought that they were friends.
It is because that they are both bankers that they are the bitterest enemies. Talk of the jealousies of women, of artists, of men of genius, of nations. Those are nothing to the jealousies of those rival capitalists who are engaged in a perpetual strife to excel each other. If Mr. Gobert gives a ball that costs $2,000, Mr. Gilmer gives one that costs $4,000. If Mr. Gobert builds a superb house, Mr. Gilmer builds a palace. It is a steeplechase of vanity, in which the conqueror has for the only price of his victory the delight of seeing his rival conquered.
Then you find the difficulty of reconciling Mr. Gilmer to vote for the left road beyond your skill?
No, I do not say that. I do not admit that by any means, but Mr. Gobert is a great obstacle.
But one which the pleasure of attending this ball will enable you to surmount.
Yes, I trust so. There is a way, there is a sacrifice I can make, and I will not hesitate for such an object. My husband detests, without the slightest cause, a gentleman who visits me frequently. Now, if I promise not to receive this obnoxious but very delightful individual whom I care nothing about, I think that Mr. Gilmer in return would be willing, for once, to cast his vote on the same side as his enemy. It would need some grave inducement, some such unquestionable sacrifice on my part.
That sacrifice may also be a prudent action, observed Madelaine.
Oh, I do not know about that,
replied the thoughtless woman of fashion.
A woman is expected to have admirers. They only render her more valuable in the eyes of her husband. I should not consent to offend this devoted friend without some strong incentive. But to be sure, being present at Madame de Fleury's ball, I would agree to anything. So it is a bargain. If I obtain you my husband's vote, you obtain me this invitation?
That is our compact, answered Madelaine.
Agreed. I shall return home with a light heart. You have cheered me wonderfully. I am inclined to be so amiable to all the world, my husband included, that all the world and my husband are your debtors. When shall I receive the good news that you have conquered Madame de Fleury?
At whatever time you think you will be prepared to send me the intelligence that you have vanquished Mr. Gilmer.
That will be this evening, before my husband goes to his club.
By this evening, then, I will have procured you the invitation.
Remember, I depend upon you. Good morning.
Mrs. Gilmer departed in high good humor, leaving Madelaine reflecting with regret upon the tools which harsh circumstance seemed to force her to use. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 29. A Contest. When Mrs. Gilmer took her leave, Madelaine returned to the seclusion of her own boudoir, having first given orders that she should be apprised when Madame de Fleury made her appearance. Madelaine was unnerved by the agitating incidents of the morning. There are days into which emotions which might fill years are crowded. It was long since she had felt oppressed by such a sense of lassitude and melancholy. Her interview with Maurice had stirred all the tenderest chords of her spirit, yet left them vibrating sadly. The mysterious visit of Count Tristan had perplexed her mind with ominous forebodings. She could scarcely be said to have seen through his machinations, yet she had an instinctive disbelief in his sincerity and the uprightness of his motives, a disbelief which she vainly tried to conceal from herself. More painful still had been her conversation with Lord Linden. She could not fail to perceive that he assumed the attitude of a lover, and she felt humbled at having apparently allowed, or rather ignored, such a position. Lastly, her late bargaining scene with Mrs. Gilmer had disturbed Madelaine's sense of delicacy, and a similar scene remained to be enacted with Madame de Fleury. Madelaine involuntarily rubbed her eyes, as though she were trying to wake from a confused dream. She could not believe that she had really entangled herself in this web of plotting, and at the bidding of Count Tristan. She feared that she had acted too impulsively, that she had made unwarrantable use of her power. Then she remembered the look of deep distress upon Count Tristan's face as he made his half-confidences. She recalled his assurances that without her imposition Maurice would not only be ruined, but that the disgrace must attach itself to his father's name. She had promised her aid, and half gained the victory, and must not retreat now, when the only portion of her work which remained to be accomplished consisted in compelling a fashionable puppet to send an invitation to a rival whom she detested. There was nothing objectionable in the act itself, yet Madelaine, during these calm reflections, shrank from the part she was playing, and revolted against being mingled up with stratagems, however innocent. This reverie was broken by the announcement that Madame de Fleury had arrived, and was at that moment trying on her dress. When Madelaine entered the apartment, Madame de Fleury was standing before a mirror, evidently admiring her new costume, and in great good humor. She turned to Madelaine gaily and said, "Mademoiselle Melanie, this dress is perfection. This corsage sets off my figure beautifully. And what exquisite apologies for sleeves you have invented! My arm is one of my best points, and the tinier the sleeve, the better. Then the looping of this lace dress through these miniature chaplets of wild roses is very original. The whole effect is wonderfully airy and poetic. This is one of your greatest triumphs. You have really surpassed yourself." As she spoke, she turned around and around, complacently contemplating her reflected image from various points of view. "I am particularly gratified at having pleased you, madame," said Madelaine, with more gravity than usual to her when she stood her light-brained customers. Madame de Fleury, without noticing her serious mien, commenced disrobing. Victorine folded up the dress and placed it in a carton. "I mean to take the dress with me," said the Marchioness. "Mademoiselle Victorine, have the goodness to desire my servant to place that carton in the carriage." As Victorine prepared to obey, Madelaine motioned her to desist, and said, "Not yet. Leave the dress for a few moments. You may retire." The forewoman reluctantly left the room, looking puzzled, curious, and indignant. "What? Is some alteration needful?" said Madame de Fleury. "Have you some fresh inspiration? Has a new idea that will improve the dress suddenly struck you?" Without replying to these questions, Madelaine looked earnestly at the Marchioness, who was now resuming her bonnet, and asked, "You are then satisfied with my work, madame?" "Satisfied? That is a cold word. I am transported." "And if," continued Madelaine, "for that dress I should require a price—" "Oh, whatever you please," replied the Marchioness lightly. "Take me prisoner, gag me, plunder me, whatever you will. I shall not complain. The dress is worth it, and we never have had any discussion in regard to price." "But the price in question is not one that can be paid with money. The price I place upon this dress is granting me a favor most precious to me." "A favor?
You have only to speak. Do you want an office for a friend, a recommendation for some ambitious compatriot to the emperor, a pardon for some exiled transgressor? Anything possible to a wife of the French ambassador is at your service. You have but to speak. My petition is somewhat easier to grant, for I ask only a few words from you in writing." As she said this, Madelaine opened a desk and placed upon it a sheet of notepaper, a gold pen, and an inkstand. Then she paused and said, hesitatingly, "Yes, though I ask but these few written words in full compensation for that dress, the materials of which, as well as the work being mine, I fear to make my petition known, for I feel that it will cost you much to comply with my wishes." "Nonsense! Speak plainly," said Madame de Fleury, smoothing her ribbons with caressing touches. "I would solicit an invitation to your ball for one of your acquaintances who, as yet, has received none, and who chances to be one of my customers." "Is that all?" "We are enacting much ado about nothing," said the Marchioness, seating herself smilingly at the desk. "You shall have the invitation, modest and mysterious petitioner. What name shall I write?" "Mrs. Madelaine faltered. "Go on," cried the Marchioness, who had commenced her note with the usual formula. "Mrs. Gilmer," responded Madelaine. Madame de Fleury threw down the pen and started up. "Mrs. Gilmer? Invite Mrs. Gilmer to a ball from which I have purposely excluded her? Invite her when I have the satisfaction of knowing that she is dying of mortification because she cannot get an invitation, when I have steeled myself against the solicitations of Madame Orlowski? Never! I would rather bear the weight of all the years which she impertinently added to my age." Madelaine, who was fully prepared for this burst, said very quietly, and approaching the Marchioness, "Madame, it is not long since you assured me that it would be a positive happiness to be able to render me a service. And I mean it. I would gladly serve you, but not by inviting Mrs. Gilmer to my ball. That is a little much to demand. But this is the service that I most need, a service for which I would be deeply grateful, for which I could never sufficiently thank you, which would attach me to you as nothing in the past has ever done." "The offer of your gratitude and the promise of your attachment are certainly very touching," said Madame de Fleury, with a scornful petulance which she had never before evinced towards Madelaine. "But I beg leave to decline the indebtedness. You have forced me to remember for the first time that when a lady in my station deals with a person in your sphere, it is possible to be too kind, too condescending, too ready to forget necessary distinctions, and thus to draw upon oneself the consequences of that forgetfulness. You have given me a lesson, mademoiselle, by which I shall profit. In the future I shall remember the distance between us." She walked towards the workroom and called Victorine, who immediately responded to the summons. Pointing to the carton, the indignant lady gave the order, "Have that dress placed in my carriage." "No," said Madelaine, addressing Victorine commandingly. "Let the dress remain where it is." "What do you mean, mademoiselle?" asked the Marchioness, in angry astonishment. "That dress is still mine," answered Madelaine. "Yours?" "It is mine, and we will each keep that which belongs to us, you the privilege of your rank, and I the results of my labor, however humble." "Do I understand you rightly? You have the hardihood to say," Madelaine interrupted her, "that I refuse to part with that dress for gold, or for any compensation that you offer, except the one already named, an invitation for Mrs. Gilmer to your ball." "She shall never have one.
I have said it, and nothing can change my resolution, nor mine. We are in the same position, madame, in spite of the difference of our statements, answered Madeleine with cold sarcasm. Nothing can change my resolution. But the dress is mine, cried Madame de Fleury. I will prove that it is mine, but we will settle that question afterwards. In meantime, I ordered you, Mademoiselle Victorine, to have that dress placed in my carriage. I order you not to touch it, said Madeleine. Madame de Fleury now became so much exasperated that she seemed to be on the point of seizing the dress and carrying it off in her arms. Madeleine perceived her intention, and, suddenly lifting the dress out of the carton, rolled it up rapidly, for the materials were light. I prove to whom the dress belongs, madame, by disposing of it thus. And with the most perfect tranquillity she flung the disputed prize into the fire. It was burning brightly, for the day was cool, though the spring had commenced. The Marchioness for a moment was stunned, but as the flames caught the lace, she cried, "Save it! Save it! It is burning! What an infamous action! What a crime! It has killed me!" She dropped upon the sofa, and was seized with one of those hysterical paroxysms which French women designate as an attaque de nerfs. Victorine, with a great display of distress, flew to the sufferer, loosened the strings of the bonnet which she was recklessly crushing, held a bottle of sal volatile to her nose, for the Frenchwoman was always prepared for similar pleasant excitements, and carried a vial in her pocket, and commenced rubbing the lady's hand with great energy. "Save the dress! Do not let it burn!" Madame de Fleury gasped out between her sobs. "The dress is beyond saving, madame," replied Madeleine. "It no longer exists." At this moment the Marchioness suddenly recovered. "And you have destroyed it? You have destroyed a toilette which would have made me talked of for a week? It is abominable! It is disgraceful! It is criminal!" Madame de Fleury always used the strongest terms where matters of the toilette, the most important interest of her life, were in question. "What am I to wear this evening? What is to become of me?" The Marchioness wrung her hands and wept in genuine tribulation. She sunk back again upon the sofa, as though prostrated by her crushing sorrow. Madeleine allowed the grief of the fine lady to expend herself in incoherent lamentations, and then said, in an icy tone, "Madame, do you desire to appear tonight in a dress which far surpasses the one I have destroyed?" The Marchioness was sobbing so violently that she could only answer by a movement of the head. "Do you desire to wear a dress which has been refused to others? A dress which Mrs. Gilmer used every argument to induce me to finish for her, but in vain? A dress which I would even have refused you, with whose wishes I have ever been ready to comply?" What dress? What do you mean?" "I refer to the dress, the design of which you so much admired this morning, the dress which is to be sent to New Orleans for Madame Lamotte." "But that dress is not finished. It is hardly commenced. Only the embroidery is completed. Mademoiselle Victorine told me it could not be done under 3 days." "It shall be finished for you, if you so please, before it is time for you to dress for this evening's assembly." "But that cannot be. It is not possible. It is 4 o'clock now. It would be a miracle." "Not quite," returned Madeleine quietly. "In past days I was said to have the fingers of a fairy.
and you shall admit that magical power remains to me. I repeat, the dress shall be completed, if you desire it, tonight." "But you have sent the design to Madame La Motte, who has approved of it, and I hear you are bound not to furnish a duplicate to anyone." "True. I must run the risk of losing the confidence of a patron for the first time in my life. I will tell Madame La Motte the truth, and furnish her with another equally elaborate dress, not a very easy matter, as it must leave here in 3 days by express, and a new design must not only be planned but executed within that time. I may lose Madame de la Motte's patronage, her esteem, but that will have to be the price I pay for the favor I seek at your hands." "The favor?" repeated the Marchioness abstractedly. In her bewilderment and grief caused by the destruction of the dress, she had forgotten for the moment all that had just taken place. Madelaine pointed to the note which the Marchioness had commenced, and said, "The invitation for Mrs. Gilmer." "Ah, Mrs. Gilmer!" cried Madame de Fleury, as though she had been stung by the name. "As you remarked, it is 4 o'clock," continued Madelaine. "The dress ought to be at your house by 9:30. There is scarcely time for anyone who only pretends to be a fairy to accomplish the work. 4 o'clock. It is just possible that I have promised too much. That is, if we lose many minutes. Have you decided to write the invitation?" "You do not give me time for reflection," said Madame de Fleury, hesitating. "You scarcely give me time," returned Madelaine, "to perform what I have promised. These moments are precious." "You are sure the dress can be completed if I give you this invitation?" "Yes, madame, if it be given at once. See," pointing to the clock, 5 minutes have flown already, and in every moment we are to do the work of an hour. There is the pin." Madame de Fleury took it reluctantly. "That detestable Mrs. Gilmer will triumph so much." "Your triumph in having obtained the dress that was refused to her, and has been refused to many others. But time flies, and I shall not be able, with all the magical aid for which I am giving credit, to keep my word. Victorine, while Madame de Fleury is writing, apprise the young ladies to put by, as rapidly as possible, all other work, and be ready to take hand in that which I will give them directly. We want our whole force. Let me find everyone prepared to aid." Victorine left the room to execute these orders. Madame de Fleury seated herself and dipped the pen in ink. "If you knew what it cost me to consent," she began. "If I did not know," rejoined Madelaine, "I should not have offered to make a sacrifice of so much importance. A few moments more, and it will be too late to decide. Your consent will be of no avail." "Ah, that is true," cried Madame de Fleury, writing rapidly. She left the note unfolded on the desk, and, as she rose, said in a tone of ludicrously mingled petulance and elation, "You have conquered, but I shall have my dress." "Be sure of it," answered Madelaine. Victorine now announced that all other work had been laid aside, and the young ladies awaited Mademoiselle Melanie's commands. "Go, go, go, or you will be too late," urged Madame de Fleury, hurrying away. Madelaine hastened to the workroom, and distributed portions of the dress to different needlewomen. After giving a number of minute directions, and making known that she would return in a couple of hours to see what progress was made, she retired to write to Mrs. Gilmer. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of
Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 30. Bertha. If Madelaine had been asked which of her relatives would first have sought her after the unexpected reconnoitre at Madame de Fleury's, she would have answered Bertha. Bertha, whose devotion had been so unflagging, so open, so daring. But on the day which succeeded that stormy interview, Count Tristan and Maurice had visited Madelaine, yet Bertha remained absent. Another day passed, and still she came not. The Countess de Gramont had resolved, at least, to postpone a meeting she might not be able to wholly to prevent. She formed her plans so dexterously that Bertha was chained to her side, fretting through the tedious hours, yet powerless to secure a moment's freedom. Exasperation caused Bertha sleepless nights. On the third morning she rose with the sun, summoned her maid, sent for a carriage, and was on her way to Madelaine's residence some 3 hours before it was likely that the slumbers of the Countess would be broken. Madelaine was preparing for her matinal walk when her cousin was announced. After the first joyous greetings were over, Bertha said, with tender delight, "And now that I have found you, my own Madelaine, I mean to come see you every day." Madelaine shook her head sadly. "Madame de Gramont will never permit that." "How can she help it if I choose to order all my dresses made here? The choice and discussion of becoming attire shall occupy as much of my time as it does of Madame de Fleury. I mean to become her rival, and almost ruin myself in splendid toilettes, that is, unless you accept my proposition." "What proposition, Bertha?" "To give up your, what shall I call it? Your occupation, your vocation. I have a great mind to say your trade. That word may shock you. Live with me, travel with me, go where I go. Will you not consent?" "No," answered Madelaine, gently but resolutely. "Do not decide hastily. You cannot know how much I need you, Madelaine. Your counsels are indispensable to me, even in days when I had no secret to confide. Now you have a secret? Is it indeed so?" Bertha nodded, paused a while, then went on abruptly. "I have been pestered to death by men who aspired to my hand, and my uncle declares there is no possibility of my finding peace until I make some choice." "And you intend to secure peace upon his terms? Possibly among those who aspired to your hand there is one who has discovered the entrance to your heart." "Among those who have aspired, there is the difficulty. Among those there is none." "Then you love one who has never aspired?" "I fear so," answered Bertha ingenuously, and yet blushing deeply. Madelaine looked troubled. She had long entertained a pleasant hope which she saw about to vanish. "And you have loved him how long?" she asked gravely. "Oh, a very short time, only since day before yesterday," replied Bertha. This answer added to Madelaine's discomposure. There was no hope for Gaston Dubois. "Why look you so sorrowful?" inquired Bertha, noticing her cousin's expression. "I am thinking of one who has loved you long, with such devotion, with such self-abnegation, with such ardent desire to become worthy of you, that I could not but sigh over his deep disappointment. But this sudden affection of yours may not be very deep." "Ah, but it is. As for the suddenness, when I say I have only loved him since day before yesterday, I mean that I only discovered how much I cared for him." "And how came you to know that he was dear to you?"
You will be very shocked when I answer that question, but you always say that I was eccentric. I first felt that I loved him when I saw him getting into a great rage, and when I positively fancied that I caught the sound of a horrible oath which he uttered in an undertone.
That is original. I never before heard of a young lady being inspired by love for a young man when he was angry or when he was profaned.
Ah, but he was angry in a good cause, retorted Bertha earnestly. It was righteous indignation, and it was the violence with which he defended one whom I love that won my heart completely.
Whom did he defend? Asked Madelaine unsuspiciously.
You, my own, my best Madelaine, and for that I loved him. It was so wonderful, knowing how constitutionally diffident he is, to see him so courageous, and when I remembered how he used to hesitate and stammer, it seemed marvelous to hear him talk with an ease, a fluency, a fervor truly eloquent. I never asked to listen to a finer oratory. My aunt, in spite of her indignation, was confounded into silence. Count Tristan could not say a word, and Maurice looked as though amazement alone kept him from throwing himself in his friend's arm, and I fear I almost felt like doing the same.
It was Gaston de Bois, then, cried Madelaine with sudden transport.
Yes, who else could it be? And he was so comical at the same time that he was so pathetic. At first I almost felt like laughing at his odd gesticulations, and then he talked so nobly, so grandly, that I felt like weeping, and you know it is my nature to laugh and to cry in spite of myself. I have made up my mind that I could never love anybody who could not make me do both at once, just as he did, and in such a comically pathetic manner.
How shall I thank you? Gaston de Bois is my best, truest friend, said Madelaine rapturously.
I know that well enough. Once I feared he might be the mysterious individual whom you loved, but he said himself that you were a sister to him, and I almost leapt for joy at those words. A sister never fills the whole of a man's heart, does she?
Not such a heart as Gaston de Bois. He will tell you himself who occupies the sovereign place in that heart when he knows that he may speak.
But how is he to know? You must promise me not to tell him, not to give him even the faintest hint of what I have communicated. Promise me that you will not.
I promise, but you forget how diffident Monsieur de Bois is, how distrustful of his own merits. He will not easily believe that you can think of him, and meantime you
will suffer. Yes, I know, but I should suffer more if I were guilty of unmaidenly action. So you will keep your promise?
I will keep it faithfully. It was time for the cousins to part. Bertha returned to the hotel with a lighter heart, because she had transferred its weighty secret to another's keeping, but Madelaine's joy was mingled with forebodings that Gaston de Bois would not suspect his own happiness for long, sad period, if ever. When she went forth, it was long past the hour usually devoted to her walk. The Capitol grounds were gay with promenaders. Madelaine and Ruth attracted more attention than was agreeable, and after a short ramble turned homeward. As they passed out of the gates, the first person they met was Gaston de Bois. He bowed, hesitated, seemed half inclined to walk on without speaking, but changed his mind and joined them. It was long since Madelaine had seen him apparently so ill at ease or so distressed. She smiled as she reflected how quickly 3 little words, which she, alas, was forbidden to speak, would change that perturbed look to one of ineffable happiness. For a few moments he walked moodily by her side, replying at random to her casual remarks. It chanced that Ruth was not conversant with the French language, and Madelaine, struck by his abstracted air, inquired in that tongue whether he had any cause for vexation. Gaston answered vaguely that he was troubled. He did not himself know with how much real cause. A moment after, he mentioned her interview with Count Tristan, and, stammering a little in his old fashion, asked whether she would deem it a great liberty if he desired to know the object of the Count's visit. A moment's reflection convinced Madelaine that Monsieur de Bois would not have made this inquiry out of sheer causeless curiosity, and she made known to him the Count's request concerning the votes which she was to exert herself to obtain. Gaston caught eagerly at her words and exclaimed, "Valueless? Are you certain Count Tristan said the property of Maurice would be valueless but for the advent of this railroad?" "Yes," replied Madelaine, "I am quite sure that was his assertion. But why do you ask? What has happened? Nothing to compromise Maurice?" "I do not yet definitely know, but if it is what I suspect, what I fear, it will compromise him woefully." "Pray be explicit," said Madelaine, becoming alarmed. "Tell me what you positively know, and what you fear. Remember, Maurice is my cousin." "Would he were more! But that wish is now in vain. In a word, then, I have no faith in Count Tristan. I believe him capable of unscrupulous actions which might ruin his son. At the club last night, a group of gentlemen chanced to be conversing near me. The name of Maurice de Gramont attracted my attention. A Mr. Emerson asserted he had just made a discovery which convinced him that the Vicomte de Gramont was a young man regardless of honor, and added that he intended, without delay, to commence legal proceedings against him. As soon as I could control my indignation, I informed Mr. Emerson that the Vicomte de Gramont was my friend, and I could not allow his name to be used with disrespect without demanding an explanation." "And he gave you one?" inquired Madelaine, greatly agitated. "He did not give me one. At first he was inclined to treat my request cavalierly, but upon my persisting, he replied that neither place nor time served to discuss a business matter, adding that he would be at his office on the morrow at 12 o'clock, and if I chose to call at that hour, the whole matter would be made known to me, remarking, significantly, that he had no intention of keeping the transaction from the public." "What could he mean?" "That I can only surmise, but a few hours will make all clear." "To gain a few hours' time may be of the utmost importance," answered Madelaine. "Try to see Mr. Emerson at once. Learn the meaning of his words, and return to me with the intelligence." "Ah, Mademoiselle Madelaine, you are always so prompt. I should have lingered until 12 without—" Go at once, and come back to me quickly. You have said enough to awaken a horrible suspicion. I do not dare let my mind dwell upon the frightful possibility that suggests itself." Monsieur de Bois bade her good morning as precipitously as she could desire, and hastened upon his mission. When Madelaine reached her home, she said to Ruth, "I am unfit for my usual duties today, Ruth. I have long intended that you should occupy a more active and prominent position in this establishment. Do you not feel yourself competent to do so?" Ruth returned affectionately, "I have studied diligently under your tuition. Sometimes I fancy that I have almost mastered some of the rules, and fathomed some of the mysteries of your art." "Today, then," rejoined Madelaine, "I mean that you shall wholly take my place. I have faith in your ability." Ruth retired, well pleased at the confidence reposed in her, and Madelaine entered her boudoir to wait, with a sense of dread which she could ill repress, the return of Gaston de Bois. The clock had just struck 12 when he was announced. One glance at his pale face hardly left Madelaine courage to ask, "What has happened?" "The worst, the very worst that I deemed possible, and I have been able to accomplish nothing. I feel like a brute to bring you these ill tidings a single hour before you are compelled to know them." "Do not keep me in suspense," urged Madelaine. Monsieur de Bois went on. "Maurice obtained a loan of $10,000 from Mr. Emerson. The security given was upon this Maryland property, which Maurice declared to be free of all mortgage, and, no doubt, he thought it was so. And, alas, it was not. So far from clear that Mr. Emerson yesterday learned that the estate was mortgaged to its full value. Count Tristan, who held in his hands a power of attorney, has doubtless made use of the instrument without his son's knowledge." "Did you not explain this to Mr. Emerson in defense of Maurice?" "Assuredly, but Mr. Emerson received my assertion with open incredulity. He is determined to write to Maurice and inform him of his discovery, and also to commence legal proceedings at once." "Should these $10,000 be paid into the hands of Mr. Emerson, would they not prevent his sending the threatened letter to Maurice or taking any other steps?" inquired Madelaine eagerly. "Undoubtedly, but how are we to command $10,000? Madelaine smiled, an inexpressibly happy smile, opened her desk, took out a paper, and said, "I had arranged to make the last payment upon this house yesterday. The sum due was $10,000. By some mistake, the person who was to receive this money did not keep his appointment. He will, doubtless, be here today. A few hours later, I might no longer have had these funds under my control. See how fortunate it is that I urge you to act promptly." "Mademoiselle Madelaine, what do you intend to do?" "Is not my intention plain and simple enough? Here is a check for $10,000. Draw the money at once and place it in Mr. Emerson's hands." "But the payment for your house—" "Cannot be made. We have no further time for discussion." "Mademoiselle Madelaine, you are—" "Very impatient and very imperative when I issue orders that I intend to have obeyed? Admitted. You need not waste time in summing up the catalogues of my imperfections." Gaston took the check and was preparing to depart when Madelaine delayed him. "Mr. Emerson must not know that these funds are furnished by me. What an endless theme for gossip and speculation would be afforded by the very suggestion that the fashionable mantua maker came to the assistance of the young nobleman. Let Mr. Emerson understand that this money is paid by one of Maurice's relatives. That will be sufficient." "Good," returned Gaston. "And if he should conclude that it was supplied by Maurice's grandmother, all the better. If I said a relative, and Madame de Gramont were not supposed to be that person, there is no one but Mademoiselle Bertha, and Mr. Emerson might infer, it would be natural to suppose—" "You are right. We must guard against such a false step. Surely no name at all is necessary, but I leave the matter to your discretion. Pray hasten." Without further discussion, Gaston set out to execute his agreeable mission. He reached Mr. Emerson's office too late to stop the threatened letter. It had already been dispatched. The young Vicomte was sitting in his father's drawing-room at the hotel, musing upon the mournful singularity of his own fate, and the mystery that still enveloped Madelaine, when the letter was placed in his hands. He was at first too completely wonderstruck to experience a high degree of indignation. He thought he must have mistaken the meaning of what he read. But no, the words were plain enough, the accusation plain enough, the threat of legal proceedings to be instituted against him plain enough. Still, he was too much amazed to be able to give credence to the communication. He seized his hat, with the intention of hurrying to Mr. Emerson and demanding an explanation. As he opened the door, his father entered. "What has disturbed you so much?" asked Count Tristan, noticing his son's disordered mien. "Nothing that will prove of consequence," returned Maurice, glancing over the open letter. "There is some vexatious mistake which will easily be explained away, and yet the language of this letter is grossly insulting." The Count's secret guilt kept him in constant state of torturing fear, and now he vainly endeavoured to conceal his alarm. He gasped out, "That letter, let me see it." Before Maurice could hand the letter, it was eagerly snatched by the Count. His face grew livid as he read. His white lips were tightly compressed, but he could not shut in the sound of a convulsing groan. Maurice, not suspecting the true cause of his father's agitation, went on, "The language is rude. The accusation is made in the most unmannerly style, and as if its justice were beyond doubt. But business men in this country are unusually abrupt, and when they are annoyed, not too courteous. One must get accustomed to their manner. My dear father, do not let this mistake affect you too deeply. It will easily be rectified. But first, let me explain the transaction." The Count dropped his head without speaking, but again the sound of a half-suppressed groan was audible. "An opportunity offered," continued Maurice, "for the advantageous employment of $10,000. Mr. Lorillard suggested my raising the money through Mr. Emerson on the security of the Maryland estate." The Count staggered and sank into a chair. The hour of discovery then had arrived. There was no escape. Like those hopeless culprits before the eternal judgment seat, he could have cried out to the mountains to fall upon him and hide him. Maurice was too much alarmed by his father's appearance to go on. The death-like pallor of his face had given place to a purple hue. His veins seemed swollen. His bloodshot eyes appeared to be starting from their sockets. His stalwart frame shivered from head to foot. He clutched the table as though for support. His head dropped heavily upon it. "My dear father," exclaimed Maurice, "do not let the mistake move you thus. I will go to Mr. Emerson at once." The Count's face was lifted for an instant, as he cried in a tone of intense agony, "No, no, not for the world." His head fell again. He could not bear the unsuspicious gaze of the son whom he had wronged, and in whose presence he sat, a self-condemned criminal. "Surely it is the fitting course," replied Maurice. "I will make him retract his words." "Impossible," was all the Count could ejaculate, still with bowed head. "But I will prove it very possible," returned Maurice, in a tone of determination. "Mr. Emerson cannot use such language with impunity. Though he threatens that the affair shall be made public, he cannot act so rashly as to carry out that menace, and upon a mere surmise of some kind. If there is any publicity, he shall publicly retract." "Impossible, impossible!" the Count groaned forth again. "That will soon be decided," answered Maurice, moving towards the door. The Count started up. "Stay, do not go yet. You do not know what you are doing. Stay, I forbid you to go." Maurice had such thorough confidence in his father's probity that his suspicions were not aroused even by this vehement language. He only imagined that the very suggestion of a dishonourable action associated with his son's names affected Count Tristan thus powerfully. "But it is absolutely necessary that immediate notice should be taken of this letter," argued Maurice. "If I had been guilty of the act which I have been accused, I could never have lifted my head again, and I feel degraded by the very suspicion. Do not detain me, I entreat you." "There is something you must hear before you go," the Count whispered hoarsely. For the first time, an indefinable dread stole into the mind of Maurice. He put down his hat, and, approaching his father, could only echo the words, "Something I must hear." "You should have consulted me," the Count continued, speaking with great effort. "True, and I meant to do so, had I not been prevented. But the transaction was simple enough. My estate is unmortgaged. I had given you a power of attorney, but I knew that it had not been used. You told me so yourself, scarcely an hour before I requested Mr. Emerson to make me this loan." No, I did not say that. You misunderstood me. I did not say that. I never said that. You only inferred it. I could not be answerable for your inferences," returned the Count, in a tone of a man defending himself. "Great heavens, what does this mean?" exclaimed Maurice. "I cannot have misunderstood you. You cannot have used the power of attorney." The Count was silent, but the shame and confusion depicted upon his countenance were a fearful answer. It was some minutes before Maurice could rally sufficiently to take a clear view of his own position. His first impulse caused him to turn to his father in an excess of rage, but the broken, contrite, abject demeanor of the latter silenced the angry reproaches that were bursting from his son's lips. The Count was the first to break the silence. He said in a pleading, exculpatory tone, "There was no other way. Matters had gone terribly wrong with me in Brittany. We were reduced to worse than poverty. I was frightfully entangled. Nothing remained but a mortgage upon your property." "What Mr. Emerson writes me in the letter is true, then?" was all Maurice could utter, but his tone pierced his father as deeply as the sharpest reproaches. The Count assented. Maurice, unable longer to control himself, broke forth, "And I shall not only be forced to endure the blighting suspicion of being guilty myself, but I must bear the terrible certainty that my father is so?" The Count only murmured in broken accents, "Oh, if the committee should select the left road!" Maurice caught eagerly at the faint hope, and after a few moments' reflection, replied in a voice which, in spite of its coldness, was not without a touch of pity, "I must see Mr. Emerson, and make an effort to postpone his present intentions until the decision is made." "It will be against us," cried the Count vehemently. "Mr. Rutledge has made up his mind to vote for the road to the right. That one vote would have saved us, but we are too unfortunate. There is no longer a chance left." Maurice went forth without replying. End of chapter 30.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and click on the bell to turn on notifications.